plus 1 standard network rate message. Or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Join me, Camila, Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camila Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
Because
the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Dubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock on Saturday, the 25th of January. It's exactly a week since Christmas Day, isn't it? What happened there? This is the weekend on GB News. Now, the National Farmers Union is staging a day of unity throughout the afternoon in protest against the government's family farm tax. We've got reporters on the ground and we are speaking to farmers throughout the show. And a day of celebration in the Middle East as 4 female Israeli hostages are handed to the Red Cross. It's the second group freed by Hamas since a ceasefire was agreed, and we've been seeing scenes of joy and jubilation. We will be there live on the ground bringing that breaking story. And the face of pure evil. We will be discussing the story that's dominated the headlines for the past week. The guilty plea and subsequent sentencing of Axel Rudbakana, who faces 52 years in prison. Calls grow for a law to change to allow under 18s to be given whole life sentences in exceptional circumstances. I don't want to look at that boy's picture anymore, to be honest with you. I'd rather look at the happy, smiling, innocent faces of those little girls who are no longer with us. God rest their soul. In any case, I'm Dawn Neeson, and this is The Weekend, and it starts right here and now. So thank you for joining me this Saturday afternoon. I really appreciate your company. It's been a very hard week on so many levels, hasn't it? So there is lots to get through in today's show. So much to unpack from the week, but also some good stuff we're talking about as well. So do stay with us. It's going to be a very, very busy show. And it is indeed nothing without you and your views. So let me know your thoughts on All the stories we'll be discussing today are by visiting gbnews.com/yoursay and joining our conversation. I have a brilliant panel and they're staying with me all afternoon. Slight tweak to the show today, a brand new format, so you really don't want to miss anything. Keeping me company today is political journalist and commentator for Novara Media, Michael Walker, and former Reform UK Deputy Leader, Ben Habib. Thank you very much for joining me, gentlemen. But before we get stuck into today's stories, let's get those news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Dawn, thank you and good afternoon. The top stories: 4 female Israeli hostages have been released by terror group Hamas today. They're now back in Israel. The girls took us to stage in Gaza City Square, where crowds of people cheered. Surrounded by armed Hamas fighters, all 4 of the girls were guided to Red Cross vehicles, waiting to take them to a border to be handed to the IDF, and we do now know that they have been handed over. They were all wearing military uniform. Israel has now reportedly released 70 Palestinian prisoners. As many as 200 are set to be released today. It's the second such exchange since the ceasefire began last weekend. The first wave saw 3 Israeli hostages released, including British-Israeli Emily Damari. And some breaking news this hour that West Yorkshire Police says 3 teenagers, one 18 and 2 aged 19, have all died after a car hit a tree near Wakefield yesterday evening. More on this breaking story just as soon as we get it. Elsewhere, heavy rain and strong winds could bring flooding to parts of the UK this weekend after the severe effects of Storm Eowyn. Up to 80 millimetres of rainfall could be seen in parts of England and Wales, with several amber and yellow warnings issued by the Met Office over today and tomorrow. It comes after winds reached 100 miles per hour yesterday, as that storm left 1 person dead. He has been named today as Casper Dudek. More than 1 million people have been left without power. It's caused significant travel disruption across the UK and in Ireland. Network Rail Scotland had said nearly 400 incidents of damage had been found, including more than 120 reports of fallen trees. Today, though, Network Rail gave an update saying most of its network is now up and running. In other news, farmers from across the UK are staging a National Day of Unity as tractors prepare to be in convoy throughout Britain in a bid to protect the sector. Comes as pressures mounting on the government to halt the controversial family farm tax that could see some forced to sell their land to foot the bill. The National Farmers Union warned that many farmers were at breaking point and couldn't afford increased bills. Elsewhere, a former actor who was released from prison in error as part of the early release scheme has been convicted of assaulting his partner the day after he was freed. Jason Hogginson, who starred in the 1987 film Empire State, was one of around 1,700 prisoners who walked free on the 10th of September last year as part of the government's plan to ease overcrowding in prisons. But the 53-year-old was one of 37 inmates who were released by mistake when the scheme was rolled out. He was photographed giving a thumbs up as he left HMP Durham after serving half of an 18-month sentence for assaulting his ex-partner and breaching a restraining order. In other news, WH Smith is reportedly in secret talks to sell its entire high street business in Britain, more than 230 years after it opened its first shop in central London. The company's high street arm comprises roughly 500 stores, employing around 5,000 people across the country. WH Smith will reportedly confirm the plan to the London Stock Exchange on Monday morning. The US State Department has ordered a freeze on new funding for almost all American foreign development assistance following an executive order issued by Donald Trump. Hours after taking office on Monday, the US president ordered a 90-day pause in US-funded global projects pending a review of their efficiency and to check they're consistent with his foreign policy. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's directive excludes funding for emergency food programmes and military aid to Israel and Egypt. However, it remains to be seen whether it'll affect the flow of vital US military assistance to Ukraine to help it fend off Russia's invasion. Around £3 billion in funding for future arms shipments to Ukraine, authorised by the US Congress, remains, but it's unclear whether Mr Trump will decide to spend it or not. And that order has been criticised by humanitarian officials because it didn't exclude life-saving health programmes. And Buckingham Palace has released a photograph of the King ahead of Burns Night tonight. That photograph, which has been posted on the royal family's X account, shows His Majesty in the library at Balmoral Castle dressed in the traditional tartan skirt. And the caption, "Wishing those celebrating a very happy Burns Night," is also included. And those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, more news from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. Right, before we get stuck into today's stories, as I said, we have got a really busy show, so thank you for your company. You don't want to move a muscle because it is absolutely packed. But I want to start by reading off a message from one of you because I could not agree with you more. This is from Andrew Paddon. No, sorry, Mark Crawford. Mark Crawford says, "That picture of that scumbag," and we all know which one you're talking about, "chills me to the bone. I just can't see or look at it anymore." And Mark, I am 100% with you. As a former editor of a national newspaper, I don't want to see his picture on page one anymore. I want to see and remember those beautiful, innocent little girls smiling out at me. So I will make my best effort not to show you that picture anymore because we don't need to see him or even remember his name. It's not about him. What he did was evil. Nothing else. OK, right, let's get straight on to today's story, because farmers, again, across the nation are staging a National Day of Unity as tractors gather throughout Britain in a bid to protect their sector. It comes as pressure is mounting on the government to halt the controversial family farm tax that could see some, in fact many, forced to sell their land to foot that bill. Well, joining us now from Selby Abbey is GB News Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley. Anna, thank you for joining us today. Another very important day for farmers, raising their voices once again. GB News right behind them, most of the country behind them. Is the government taking any notice? What's happening with you today?
Good afternoon, Dawn. Well, we're here in Selby for their National Day of Unity. Many farmers have gathered here today. We've got the beautiful backdrop of Selby Abbey. We've got a turnout of tractors here as well, because, of course, it's not just the farmers that are impacted by this, but the wider agricultural sector. People telling us that there's been drops in tractor sales because farmers simply don't know if they can afford it due to this family farm tax. And I'm joined now by Sophie Bramley. Sophie, you're a local farmer. Just tell me about this day of action and what it means to you.
It's very important that we've come out today and so many of the public have come out to support us. We're just trying to raise awareness and get the message across to the government that the family farm tax is going to have such a devastating effect on us. And as farmers, we just want to get on with the job in hand to feed the nation, to look after the environment, and the tax is just adding to the already gaining pressure of costs and the weather, etc.
Selby's a Labour-held constituency. You did invite your local MP, Keir Mather, to come along. He hasn't been here. There's been some people from the Reform Party that have been speaking, but what is the message that you're wanting to get across to local and national government, and do you feel like you've been considered as part of this?
In all honesty, we don't think we've been considered. We feel that it's been so badly thought through, and that as farmers we've been thrown under the bus. The message is please look again at the statistics and the detail and understand that the tax will have a devastating effect to a lot of smaller, more moderate farms, which are the majority of the farms in the country. The target of the bigger corporate farms, which I believe they were trying to hit, I honestly don't feel it's going to have that much impact on them. They can swallow it and afford it. We just can't.
We can see here a tractor just going past. There's been a convoy earlier this morning of tractors coming through, and certainly a lot of the public turning out as well, watching that convoy. A lot of cars coming past that are honking their horns. Do you think the public are getting the message of what farmers are going through, and do you feel supported?
Yes, I genuinely do. I think that people do understand that farmers produce the food that goes on the table. And they are very much behind us, yeah. It's heartwarming, really, that most of the people I've spoken to this morning have given support and pledged to keep doing so.
And what's next? I don't think this will be the last that we've heard from farmers on this.
No, we have just got to keep plugging away at this. It's not really in the nature of your British farmer to be causing trouble, making waves. We just want to get on with what we're doing, but we feel that we've been backed into a corner, really, and we're going to have to keep the pressure on until the government are prepared to listen to us. I think there'll be more of similar events to this. We don't want to go French and start setting fire to bales in the middle of the road and that kind of thing. That's not our style, but we feel we are going to have to increase the pressure until our message is heard.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. So that's the message here from Sophie and other farmers that we've spoken to throughout this day of action here in Selby, spreading that message to stop the family farm tax. And as you've heard from Sophie just now, it's not the last that people hear from farmers.
No, it won't be. Thank you very much indeed, Anna Riley in Selby there with that wonderful Abbey as a backdrop. She will be joining us throughout the day, bringing us up to date on what is going on with this protest. And indeed, now we are going to talk to a farmer, Esther Rudge, to see what effect this is having on her. Esther, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. Another day of action, another day of protest. We've heard hoots and honks from passers-by there. The public are supporting you. GBNews are certainly supporting you. Have you heard anything from the government at all?
No, nothing come from the government yet. I'm afraid I haven't got quite as glamorous backdrop as my colleague. I'm in the sheep shed. We're on lambing at the moment. So,
because
yeah.
you know what, Esther? Because you work hard, and this is what the government don't seem to understand. They think you're all landed gentry and you're £1 million worth of acres, sort of sitting there, God knows, doing what you're taking your dogs for a walk all day, when you're actually out there doing the job.
Exactly, that is just it. We've got a lot of capital invested in the farm, but the actual money that we take home at the end of the day is tiny.
Well, this is the problem with this policy, Esther. I mean, it's, even if it did work out financially, the money it raised, 520 million, it's not enough to fund the NHS for a day, basically. Meanwhile, the government are spending 536 million on foreign farmers. That's taxpayers' money. That's your taxpayers' money going to that, and it could be seeing your farm go out of business.
Absolutely. And the other thing that they don't seem to realise is, yes, OK, you might have to raise that money from inheritance tax, but they'll lose it on income tax. So the amount of tax they get in the end will probably be less because we'll be making less profit, so we won't pay income tax. It's not that farmers don't pay tax. We're happy to pay tax on the income, on the profit that we derive. But I'm paying it on capital. The only way to actually raise that money is to sell some of your land, which becomes then a farm, which becomes uneconomical to run.
Exactly. And Esther, we heard this week Rachel Reeves out, talking to various genuine millionaires and billionaires, saying that she is considering maybe doing a U-turn or tweaking the non-dom tax. But meanwhile, nothing about farmers. How does that make you feel?
Just so frustrated. They're so frustrated. We're not being listened to. You've got all the major supermarkets now have come in and said, to the government, please reconsider. You've got lots of experts telling them, independent experts saying this needs to be reconsidered. They've not really achieved anything with it. There's still a loophole, although it's a smaller loophole, and then also they're going to be putting farmers out of business. So it just doesn't achieve. I don't know what it achieves. It needs to be reconsidered.
Briefly, Esther, because I know obviously you're busy. You've got lambs being born literally as we speak. But where do you go from here, Esther, if you don't get any reaction from the government? If this protest goes nowhere today, what is your next step?
The next step is to keeping it actually in the forefront of the news. So channels like yours, that we're still there in the forefront, and we're actually there communicating with the public. One good thing that's come out of this is actually we're talking to the public, who are our customers at the end of the day. And part of this is born out from a lack of understanding of how farming works.
Indeed.
And so if part of the outset from this is the fact that we're actually to communicate with our customers more, and they understand what's involved in having the farm, running a farm, that is a good outcome. But it's very patronising of the government to tell us that, oh, well, at least it'll make you consider your succession again, as if we haven't already considered our succession and invested money in getting our succession sorted. And now they're saying, oh, well, that's very nice of them to say. How condescending is that? Telling us that, in fact, at least it'll make you do something.
Indeed. Maybe they'll start to realise when they start running out of food in their supermarkets. Esther Rudge, and you are in Hertfordshire, isn't it? Thank you very much for
joining. No, we're not. Herefordshire.
Herefordshire.
Common mistake. Herefordshire does exist.
Sorry, both begin with H. Good luck with those lambs behind you. Esther, thank you very much for joining me. It's just, honestly, you just can't believe how, we'll do a U-turn if we're talking to billionaires, but the farmers, well, they're not that important, are they? They'll only feed the entire country. OK, let's see what my panel make of this. Political journalist and commentator for Novara Media, Michael Walker, and former Reform UK Deputy Leader Ben Habib. Thank you very much for me. I'm sorry, Michael, I'm getting so angry about this still. It's not even been fought financially through the amount of money this inheritance tax on farms is going to raise. And no one's listening to farmers.
I mean, I think Labour have got themselves into difficulties, principally because they did need to raise more money. Right, we did have public services which were completely on their knees. Now, the most obvious way to raise money is you raise income tax, or you raise national insurance, or you raise corporation tax, or you raise VAT, and they ruled out all of those. So
yeah, the biggies, they ruled them out straight away.
So essentially they got into government, and now they're trying to find small pots of money everywhere, and what they haven't really realised, or what they've realised now, is when you're actually seeking small pots of money everywhere, it's more politically difficult than just giving everyone 1p extra on income tax, because particular groups feel targeted. So we've had older people feeling targeted with the winter fuel payment. Now farmers feel targeted with this one. Now, I don't actually have a particularly cynical perspective on this. I think this was sort of Labour thinking there is a loophole here that some people are abusing, because some people were buying up farmland simply to avoid inheritance tax. And, I mean, clearly they haven't thought it through as much as they should have done, because clearly it is hitting people, which it doesn't seem like this is a particularly efficient way to raise money if it does mean that people have to sell up their farms.
Yeah, exactly. The farms that have been in families for generations, Ben. And in particular, galling, I find, is at the same time, the government are giving $536 million of taxpayers' money, farmers' money, to foreign farms.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we are living in an economy which is, I think, in a doom loop, out of which it's going to be very, very difficult to emerge. And the settled wisdom, as Michael described, is that faced with, reducing access to capital, the government just continues to raise taxes. But actually, we do need to cut spending dramatically. Government needs to take its tentacles out of our personal lives and out of the lives of our businesses and so on. And we need to cut back some of the ridiculous regulatory obligations that the government has foisted on the British people and British businesses. Most notably, the drive towards net zero, which by the government's own estimation is costing the economy £50 billion a year. And if you could deregulate, cut the burden of taxation on businesses, counterintuitively reduce taxes rather than increase them when you're in need of money, boost the economy, actually what they will find, and I'm absolutely certain of it, that you'll get a growing economy and a greater tax take by the government, because we've gone past the point in our economy where further tax rises can take place without doing further damage to the economy. And that's why I say we're in a doom loop. We need a complete reassessment of the way that our economy is being managed.
I mean, the number of firms on the brink of collapse, I shouldn't laugh because it's not actually even funny, is it, has surged under Labour, despite this promising growth and change.
Jobs are being lost at their fastest rate. In December and January, jobs are being lost at their fastest rate. In December, the government borrowed more money than it has done in any other previous December on record, with the exception of 2 others. The plan that she had of raising £36 billion in taxation and another £34 billion a year in government debt, that was the £70 billion spending commitment she made in the budget. That plan's already falling apart. She's not collecting the tax and she's having to borrow more money. And that means that there'll come a point where the government will find it impossible to go to the markets and get the money that it needs, because the markets will lose confidence in the government's ability to forecast its needs and the ability for the government and this country to grow, and the government's ability to deliver growth. And if we get to that point, and we're not a million miles off it, Dawn, if we get to that point, we will then have a sovereign debt crisis. And the government will have to go cap in hand to the IMF. And that hasn't happened since the 1970s. And people, I think, take far too much for granted. You know, we all kind of travel in our lives thinking it'll all be all right on the night. But I think we are on the precipice of real problems here.
Oh, a doom loop. Yes. We're 25th of January, people, just literally a month after Christmas Day, and Ben Habib was talking about a doom loop. We do have some fun stuff in the show coming up, believe me. But for all the best analysis and opinion on that story, please do go to our website, gbnews.com. I am Dawn Newsom. This is indeed GB News, and there is loads more coming up on today's incredibly stuffed show. We are returning to the story that's dominated the headlines for the past week, the guilty plea and subsequent sentencing of Axel Rudge over the Southport killings. All of that and much more to come. This is GB News, Britain's news channel. Don't go too far. We'll see you soon.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Lisa, you got in touch with me and you flagged this survey because you were concerned as a parent that your child had been given this to fill out.
Yeah, I mean, my daughter came home from school. She was very confused. She was asking why somebody would want to hurt themselves if they were feeling sad or worried about something. So that led to a conversation that we had, and I actually phoned the school and asked them to send me the survey, which with a lot of pushing, they eventually did send me the survey. And when I read through it, I was just completely shocked at the content. The survey says when I'm feeling worried that maybe I should try cutting or harming myself, because it's in the survey, so that must be an option. I've tried everything else, so why not try this?
It is astonishing that some of these are young children who are perhaps being introduced to these, these abuses for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a list of 17 different types of drugs, some of which I've actually never heard of myself. I mean, the wording on here is, have you ever got high from taking drugs? I mean...
And we know that some of these behaviours, self-harm, gender dysphoria, taking drugs, are psychologically contagious. Children do them because they see other children do them, or they find out about them from the internet or from surveys like this. So the idea that this is just information gathering and won't go any further than that is ridiculous. There was a similar survey in Scotland, I think, about 3 years ago, where children the same age, 11, 12, 13, were asked about their sex lives. How many times have you had sex in the last year? How did you have sex? Did you use contraception? Totally normalising underage sex. So the idea that children are just mini adults and we can confront them with all the same kind of ideas and dilemmas that adults have to face is just ridiculous.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point.
He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Hello and welcome back to The Weekend with me, Dawn Neeson. Thank you for your company this afternoon. I really appreciate it, especially after the week we've all had, let's be honest. Not been an easy one, has it? So let's return to that story as dominated the headlines for the past week. The guilty plea and subsequent sentences of Esther Rudge, who we're not showing anymore, and I'm glad, because those are the pictures of those 3 girls, the 3 little ones we lost, and we want to remember their innocent faces. Any case, the scumbag is facing 52 years in prison for the cold-blooded murders of Elsie Stankham, BB King and Alistair Silva Aguirre, and you can see those beautiful little faces there. Shocking revelations emerged about ricin links, deleted internet history and various mental health failings before the attack. So, how is Southport today? I don't know about you, but I'm feeling like it's just been the week from hell, listening to stuff you don't ever want to hear. But what's it like in Southport? I'm joined now by Patrick Trollope from the Southport Reporter. Patrick, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. I really appreciate your time. I have no words for what Southport has been through. It's been hell, and listening to the testimony of some of those incredibly, stunningly brave people, certainly the little ones, about what's happened to your town. Can you just tell us what it's like in Southport at the moment after this week?
It's still in shock. It's been devastating for the entire area. I think it's touched everybody. There's nobody in the town that it hasn't touched. For a small seaside town that's very close-knit, it's something that you would never have ever thought would happen or even take place. We have major events and things like that on all the time in the town, and there's always a chance something might happen at a major event, but something at a dance class, so innocent, so it's beyond words.
And do you think, I mean, listening to the testimony of those families, and in particular some of the older children, I was torn by feeling, obviously, absolutely horrified, but also the courage in some of those testimonies, that no matter what this evil piece of filth, I'm not even going to use his name anymore because I don't want to remember his name, the courage in those little girls and their families' testimonies about the future. Do you think there is hope? Do you think Southport will recover from what you've been put through?
Southport will recover, no matter what, it will recover. It's like anywhere in the world. When they've had a major incident, places do recover after a while, but it would take a lot of help and a lot of support that will be needed to do this. Businesses in the town have suffered massively, and that's had a huge impact on the local economy and the local environment as well. It's also had an effect on the emotions of everybody. People are still very nervous. It's hard to put into words, and I don't think this country's ever had anything quite like this.
No, I can't think in many years of covering some of the horrors that this country has seen at the hands of filth. I can't think of anything that even comes close. How are the families being looked after by the town? As you say, it's an incredibly close-knit community. It does seem there's an awful lot of support for those who are suffering.
Everybody is trying to guard the families as much as possible. They need time to recover. They need time to actually take in what's happened as well and grieve. And at the moment, with everything going on, my own personal view is I don't think they've had time to grieve or come to terms with what's happened. And I think with all the interest from I've never known anything like it, with so much interest from all over the world, and so much bad news being mixed in with fake news and conspiracy theories and everything else. It's been an absolute nightmare.
Do you?
And I feel so sorry for the families.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we all do. I mean, absolutely. I mean, it sounds a platitude, but I mean, you know, thoughts and prayers with the families, indeed, and the survivors. Just very, very quickly, one last question. Keir Starmer said he wants to draw a line in the sand now. Do you think he owes the people of Southport and those families an apology?
It's hard to say, very hard to say, because this is it's multiple governments have been involved throughout this. Multiple people have been in charge of the government, so it's not just Keir Starmer; it's across the board. The whole system does need looking at. There's no two ways about it. Something like this should never have happened. It's let down the families. It's let down the killer as well in many ways, which is rather hard to say from somebody from Southport to say that. But the whole system needs looking at. I mean, how on earth it has slipped through the net is beyond belief. And this tick box nation we've got, which is, I think, is the fundamental problem of our society and our system. If it doesn't match that tick box, it's going to fall through. And I think something that's not to preempt what's going on, but I think that's probably going to be one of the major factors in it.
Patrick, thank you very much for joining us. That's Patrick Trollope from the Southport Reporter. Thank you very much for joining us. And please pass on everyone here's best to all those in Southport, and in particular family and the victims. I'm Dawn Neeson, and this is GB News, and there's lots more coming up on today's show. We are discussing the release of 4 more Israeli hostages following the ceasefire deal. But first, let's get those news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Dawn, thank you very much. The top stories. 4 female Israeli soldiers held by terror group Hamas have been released as part of a ceasefire deal that's brought an end to 15 months of fighting in Gaza. Hostages Karina Ariev, Daniela Gilboa, Naama Levy, all aged 20, and 19-year-old Liri Albag were all serving with the Israel Defense Forces when they were captured. Surrounded by armed Hamas fighters, the women waved and smiled as they were led onto a podium in Gaza City before being guided to Red Cross vehicles, taken to a border point and then handed to the IDF. Israel has reportedly released 70 Palestinian prisoners. As many as 200 are set to be released today. It's the second exchange since a ceasefire began last weekend. The first wave saw 3 Israeli hostages released, including British-Israeli Emily Damari. Elsewhere, around 185,000 homes and businesses remain without power in Northern Ireland following Storm Éowyn. Heavy rain and strong winds could also bring flooding to parts of the UK this weekend. Up to 80 millimetres of rainfall could be seen in parts of England and Wales, with several amber and yellow warnings issued by the Met Office for today and tomorrow. It comes after winds reached 100 miles per hour yesterday as the storm left a person dead. He's been named today as Casper Dudek. Network Rail gave an update today, saying most of its network is now up and running. And farmers from across the UK are staging a National Day of Unity as tractors prepare to be in convoy throughout Britain in a bid to protect the sector. It comes as pressures mounting on the government to halt the controversial family farm tax that could see some forced to sell their land to foot the bill. The National Farmers Union warned that many farmers were at breaking point and couldn't afford increased bills. And those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, more news from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. Storm Eowyn brought plenty of disruption to end the working week, and there's still some changeable weather on the way as we head through the rest of the weekend. Storm Eowyn, though, moving away towards the northeast, towards Scandinavia, and then we see this weather front arriving through the rest of Saturday and into the start of Sunday, bringing some outbreaks of showery rain. But before we get there, there will be plenty of sunshine on offer through Saturday afternoon for many of us. Still some isolated showers across much of Scotland, these likely falling as sleet and snow over the hills, and still rather windy across the Northern Isles, gusts here of 50 to 60 miles an hour to end the day on Saturday. Temperatures will be around about average for most of us, although definitely feeling chilly where you're exposed to that breeze further north. As we then go through Saturday evening, we see that band of showery rain arriving across western parts of the UK. So across Northern Ireland first and into parts of western Scotland, again turning to sleet and snow over any high ground, but eastern Scotland generally staying a little drier through this evening with some clear skies to start. For Northern Ireland, we do see those blustery showers though, and again we could see some sleet and snow over the hills, and it'll be turning rather windy on this weather front as it pushes its way eastwards. For much of England, a dry start to the night, but further west we see that showery rain arriving, some quite heavy downpours likely on this as it spreads its way eastwards into the early hours of Sunday morning. It starts to fizzle out by the time it gets to eastern parts of England, but we could see some sleet and snow over the high ground across the parts of the Pennines, but then generally turning drier behind, and we could see some clear skies developing, allowing temperatures to drop quite widely, particularly across Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland. Some frost likely and perhaps some ice in places, but generally a little bit of a milder start further south. We see some clouds starting to build, and all eyes down towards the southwest as we see this next weather front pushing up from the southwest, spreading its way north and eastwards, bringing some quite heavy rainfall to parts of southwest England, parts of Wales, even into parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England too, and some strong winds likely as we go through Sunday afternoon. Temperatures again around about average for the time of year, but some milder air just being brought up across the southwest.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Hello and welcome back to The Weekend with me, Dawn Neeson. Thank you for your company this afternoon. Now, earlier today, good news, people, Hamas released 4 female Israeli soldiers surrounded by armed fighters. The women were led onto a podium in Gaza City where they waved and smiled before they were handed over to Red Cross vehicles, waiting to take them to a border point to be handed over to the IDF. It's now been confirmed that they have arrived at a hospital in Tel Aviv. So, thankfully, we have 3 women last week that were released, and now we have Daniela Gilboa, Nama Levy, Karina Ariev and Liri Albag, who have all been released and should be reunited with their families very soon. So let's see what my panel make of this. Political journalist and commentator Michael Walker and former Reform UK Deputy Leader Ben Habib. Coming to you first on this one, Michael. This has to be good news. 4 young women, 20, the youngest, Liri, is just 19 years old, just before her 20th birthday, about to be reunited. This has to be good news, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they looked very sort of happy and pleased, actually, didn't they, when they were being released?
Well,
I mean, it must be an enormous relief.
Absolutely. I mean,
to be freed after all of this time.
475 days in captivity?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, you know, everyone should be celebrating the release of the hostages and the release of people that Israel had captive, sort of often without charge. I mean, I suppose the political question for me is why couldn't this have happened 6 months ago instead of now? Because obviously those 6 months would have been incredibly traumatic for those hostages. Those 6 months also saw a hell of a lot of Palestinians be killed, many of them civilians, many of them women and children. So, yes, I mean, it's great this exchange is happening. It should have happened a very long time ago.
Why do you think it didn't happen a long time ago?
Well, I think Netanyahu in Israel, he had an interest in keeping the war going because he thought that he wasn't that popular. He didn't want to go into a general election. And if he ended the war, the far right in his government would have left and that would have crumbled or collapsed the coalition. So I think it's the fact that Donald Trump came in and said, look, you can't run rings around me in the same way that you ran rings around Joe Biden. So I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, but it does seem like he did move the dial when it came to what Israel was doing, basically because Joe Biden was just too deferential to Benjamin Netanyahu.
OK, what do you make of it, Ben?
Well, I agree. I think this peace deal, this ceasefire and the exchange of hostages and the release of Palestinian prisoners, in a ratio, by the way, of around 30 or 50 to 1, depending on which hostage is being released. This peace deal has been on the table, I'm told, for about a year, but Netanyahu refused to take it, and it was President Trump leaning on Netanyahu and his regime, saying you've got to reach peace. And it is testimony, you know, just note it, I think it is testimony to President Trump's commitment to bringing peace across the globe. And whether or not you think he was right in leaning on Netanyahu is a different point, but he has brought peace, and peace is a great thing. What I take away from the imagery, though, of what we've seen is that Hamas are using this as an opportunity to show that they're far from a broken force. You know, the individuals turning up to hand over these hostages are incredibly well clad, they look very healthy, they're fully armed. There's a lot of choreography that's going on around the handing over the hostages, and it's a message, I think, to Israel and to the West. Look, you haven't broken us. But what I think Netanyahu has achieved, and we must also recognise this, is that over the last year and a quarter, he has prosecuted a war against Hamas in Gaza. He's prosecuted a war against Hezbollah with great success in Lebanon. He has neutered Iran to a very significant extent in the Middle East. And he's even taken on the Houthi rebels in Yemen who are causing so much trouble for us. Actually, Netanyahu has done a lot of good work, inverted commas good, as far as the West's interests in that region are concerned. And I'm delighted there's a peace deal that now has been agreed. It's a fraught peace deal because every stage after this initial stage requires to be negotiated before the next step can be taken. So it could fall apart at any time. And, you know, what I hope comes out of this is a reconstruction of Gaza, but in a Western influenced way, which prevents Hamas from being able to exploit the complaints and the penury and the difficulties of the Gazan people.
Just interrupting you there, Ben, you are watching live pictures of the Israeli hostages arriving in Tel Aviv there and hopefully reunited with their families very soon. As soon as we see any pictures of that, you will see them with us. I just want to ask you one question here, Michael, on this one. Lots of people are getting in touch saying, you know, considering Hamas and the Palestinians have been living in a hellhole, many thousands have died. No one's disputing that. But Hamas handing over the hostages looked incredibly well fed, incredibly healthy. The vehicles they were driving looked very shiny and freshly waxed. Now, considering this is a country on its knees, how is that happening?
Well, I mean, I find it a bit odd we're all saying they look so healthy because you can't see any part of their body, right?
Well, you can tell by their physique.
They don't exactly look skeletal, do they?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, you know, Hamas is a very well-organised operation and its priority will be the survival of Hamas. So, presumably they would have had better access to aid.
Shouldn't its priority also be looking after the Palestinian people?
Well, it should be, but I don't think many of the groups involved in this. I think Netanyahu's out for himself. I think Hamas are pretty much out for themselves. I don't think we can sort of look at the players in this and think they're all acting with the best of intentions. Now, I mean, I think it's important to rationalise what they're doing on both sides. You know, I think it's important to say, why is Netanyahu doing what he's doing? Why is Hamas doing what he's doing? They're not completely irrational on either side, but I don't think either side are particularly sort of honourable people looking out for
But I mean, I think we would all agree, wouldn't we, that we'd want Hamas absolutely obliterated, and then Gaza to be built into a prosperous, new, settled, democratic state, which can look after.
Netanyahu wouldn't agree with that, right?
But but we around this table would agree that.
Well, I mean, in an
wouldn't we?
ideal world, I'd like that to happen, but I suppose unless you sort of put the spotlight on both parties in this, I think you are inclined to misunderstand what's going on, because I think there is an impression that Netanyahu wants to give, which is that he wants to live next to peaceful Palestinians and he wants them to be controlled in a secular, democratic way. Now, everything we know about Netanyahu is the Palestinian Authority, which was the more secular one. He really didn't like them. He tried to strengthen Hamas because his priority is to not have an independent Palestinian state.
But we are running out of time, unfortunately, on this one, so we will come back to it. Just quickly, I mean, Netanyahu doesn't like Hamas, and whether he wants Gaza to exist or not is another matter. But Hamas are meant to be there looking after the people of Palestine.
Well, I mean, are they? I mean, they're a militant group.
That was democratically elected.
Well,
we're running out of time,
the government.
Unfortunately.
They were the government, but I mean, they haven't been able to function as government for a very long time, have they?
We will be coming back to that, Michael, because I'd like you to answer that question. OK, but we have to move on very quickly, but we are coming back. If you want to escape, and who would blame you? In search of some winter sun, here's a forecast for some of the top European holiday destinations.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
More showers to come across Cyprus this weekend, although it does look drier by Monday. There's more wet weather to come across parts of Spain and Portugal too. There are those showers clearing by Monday. Plenty of fine and sunny weather over the central Mediterranean. Good looking day on Sunday across Sicily and Sardinia. Some sunshine for the Balearics, but more rain heading into southern Spain and Portugal. Plenty of sunshine in the Canaries this weekend, and things are warming up into the mid-20s on Monday in Tenerife.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Underestimate what you did, because to do it in their backyard as well, I bet they weren't happy about it, were they, Brad?
No, definitely not. Well, it makes it all the more sweeter. So they're usually pretty dominant in a two-man event, but four-man's usually where we can challenge them. And yeah, we managed to do it yesterday and put down 2 solid runs. And yeah.
So yeah, funding was a big issue for us in the last quad, but because of our results recently, we've picked up a lot more funding from UK Sport. So we're well funded now, and but yeah, the Bob is in the back of the van behind us, so we're driving it down to St Moritz as we speak. So yeah, it's, that's how it all works in the background in bobsleigh.
Brad, you're the pilot, correct? So you're up front.
Yeah.
Now, what happens? I always wonder, because I remember seeing John Noakes on. Do you remember John Noakes on Blue Peter when he fell out of the Bob and he ended up showing the back of his backside on TV because he had a big scar on there? What? So you've got the brake man. You're at the front. So where are you then, Aaron? Are you what number are you?
So I'm number 3. Yeah.
Right. So what do you do there? Is it just a matter of it's the running power is what it's all about to get off to a good start, and then you can sit and enjoy the ride?
Yeah, that's it. So for number 2 and myself, number 3, it's all about getting that Bob off the line and then just zipping it up to as high a speed as we can, basically. Yeah. Getting in, staying low, having good aerodynamics, and staying still and let Brad do the work.
Yeah, it's definitely not a comfortable position for them, because we're bending them and twisting them into quite an uncomfortable position to get as aerodynamic as possible. And when you've got 6 times G's pushing you through that, is not. Yeah, not
definitely
fun.
Stiff back this morning, that's for sure.
Because I'm just thinking where me and Eamon would sit. Is it 2 and 3, or would he go at number 4? What do you fancy?
I would be too frightened to do that.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
Because
the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Dubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here
We do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
I think the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Thinking.
So
he did a great interview with
Dawn Neeson. Thank you for your company this afternoon. Now, do you want to talk about something fun for a change, shall we? Well, it depends on which team you support, by the way. It's because it's the latest from the world of sport, and I'm joined now by Sports Supremo, Aidan McGee. Aidan.
Good morning. Good afternoon, sorry.
But yeah, I mean, I've got no idea. 25th of January. You know, it's a month since Christmas Day already.
Unbelievable.
Nothing.
No.
OK, so what's happening in the world of sport?
Well, let's start with Pep Guardiola, because there were some really interesting comments yesterday, quite pointed, I would suggest. He basically said that there's no fear factor around his team anymore. No one's scared of them. And he said that we're the worst team in the league, in the Premier League, out of possession. So when we haven't got the ball, that's a crucial thing in football these days. It may sound a bit strange to the uninitiated, but what you do without the ball is as important now as what you do with it, and that's what he based his teams around. So these are some really cutting remarks. They've got a 5:30 kickoff today against Chelsea. I can only imagine he said to his players beforehand, "Look, I'm going to have a little bit of a swipe at you in the press conference, because maybe I want to move the board into doing something as regards replenishing this squad. There are quite a few getting older. We'll mention Kyle Walker in a moment. At the age of 34." Going over to Serie A, to AC Milan until the end of the season. But there are some players, we've seen some of them, I wouldn't say drop off completely, but there are some that look a little bit over the hill. Kevin De Bruyne would be one of them. And I don't think it's because he's saying this because, all right, he's managing his exit, because, all right, there are 115 charges hanging over them still. But he signed a new contract just the other, 6 weeks ago?
You're talking to size of squad. I mean, there are a lot of teams in the Premiership who are going, well, you've got slightly bigger squad.
Yes, that's absolutely true. But and also, he enticed Erling Haaland to sign on for 9.5 years. So it's not a sign that this guy is moving out of town completely. They've also spent 100 million quid in this window, and they're still in a few tournaments. I mean, they're still in the Champions League. Poor result in the week, of course. They were 2-0 up in Paris against PSG, lost 4-2. They're stuttering in the league. I mean, they put 8 past Salford and 6 past Ipswich, but they're probably not the sides that you're going to test yourself against, really, or measure your progress against. So there's still plenty to do, because they can qualify for the Champions League, etc., and they're still in the FA Cup. So it just seemed quite strange remarks. He's just been behaving quite peculiarly lately. I'm not sure whether it's because he's splitting up from his wife, or whether, I don't know if you saw. Did you see the autograph hunters turning up outside his house?
Yeah, it's very,
And, he was saying, do something better with your lives. I mean, it's just not something he's hates fans.
We have to talk very, very quickly about tennis, which is something I know nothing about.
Well, we had the eldest ever first-time Grand Slam winner in the female section. It was Madison Keys, the US 19th seed. Outstanding performance from her. She beat Arina Sabalenka in 3 sets. 29 years old, but she was the firm underdog in that, and she's gone ahead and won today. So congratulations to her.
Oh, brilliant! At 29, God almighty. How ancient is that? Thank you very much, Aidan McGee. I'm Dawn Neeson. This is GB News. Loads more coming up on today's show, so don't go anywhere. But first, it's time for the weather with Ellie.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. It's going to stay quite changeable as we head over the rest of the weekend and into the start of the new working week. Low pressure always close by to the UK, bringing some wet and windy weather at times. Storm Eowyn, that brought disruption through Friday, clears away towards Scandinavia. Then we've got this weather front arriving through Saturday evening and into the start of Sunday, bringing some outbreaks of quite heavy and showery rain across parts of Northern Ireland, and then later into parts of Scotland, Northern England, parts of Wales too. It generally fizzles out by the time it gets towards Eastern England, and we will see some clear skies developing behind. And under those clear skies, likely to turn quite chilly, particularly across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland, seeing some frost and perhaps some icy stretches through Sunday morning. A touch milder across the very far south, although temperatures still dropping down into the low single figures. But a bit of cloud then building across the southwest. We see this weather front arriving, pushing its way north and eastwards, bringing some quite heavy downpours across parts of Devon and Cornwall through the early hours of Sunday morning. A bit of a dry start for the rest of England, and for Northern Ireland and Scotland, generally quite a dry, bright and chilly start to to the day on Sunday. Some showers still continuing across the very far north of Scotland. Again, these likely falling as sleet and snow over any high ground. That weather front across the very far southwest pushes its way north and eastwards through Sunday morning and into the afternoon. That heavy rain then spreading across parts of Northern Ireland, parts of Northern England and later into parts of Scotland too. Turning really quite blustery as well behind that weather front, some heavy and blustery showers pushing in from the southwest. Temperatures will be round about average for the time of year for most of us, although generally staying a little bit milder across the south as we see some milder air brought in. Across Scotland, it will be a dry and bright afternoon, but that rain eventually reaches them through Sunday evening, likely to turn to sleet and snow over the high ground. And then we've got another weather front just pushing across the south of the UK. Again, some heavy downpours likely here. Generally remaining unsettled through the first part of next week, but there are some hints that we're likely to see high pressure starting to build, although perhaps turning a little chilly.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win our biggest cash prize so far, £50,000 in tax-free cash. How would you react if you won?
We won 25,000. I'd say don't hesitate, do it. If you're not in it, you've got no chance of winning it.
Don't miss out as lines close on Friday. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
First, mate, we had lockdowns. Then we had soaring energy costs. Then we had a hike in national insurance for employers. Then we had soaring wage costs. And now the government expects people like you to monitor what people say in boozers. And if you don't, you might get sued. I bet you feel like saying cheers to them, don't you?
Look, it just looks like another war on pubs, you know. Remember, they tried to stop smoking outside as well. Luckily, they rethought that. But look, we've got everything stacked against us, Martin, and the last thing I need to do is go and get in people's conversations. At the end of the day, a pub is like an extension to your home. You know, it's a public house. Friends go to speak. Friends go to meet, unwind after work. It's none of my business what you're talking about. Any good publican, and myself included, anyone that was rude to anyone or on purpose, they want to offend people or they want to dig people out, antagonise them, of course I'm going to step in and say, behave yourself or you go. But look, how can I be on social media talking about everything, transgender, immigration, and people not be allowed to do that at the bar or do that at the table of a pub? It's ridiculous. And these ministers really do need to sort of look at this legislation and see where it could lead, because I'm not going to stop anyone speaking in my pub. Again, if they're trying to antagonise people or they're rude or trying to start trouble, they get thrown out the front door, and any publican worth their salt is going to do that as well. But we're not there to police people's conversations.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello and welcome back. It's good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock on Saturday, the 25th of January, and this is the weekend on GB News. Now, the National Farmers Union is staging a day of unity throughout the show in its protest against the government's family farm tax. We've got reporters on the ground and we're speaking to farmers throughout the show, so don't go anywhere on that one. And a day of celebration in the Middle East as 4 female Israeli hostages arrive in Tel Aviv. It's the second group freed by Hamas since a ceasefire was agreed, and we've seen scenes of joy and jubilation. We are live on the ground with that breaking story for you. And Reform UK has pulled ahead of both Labour and the Conservatives to top a national poll alone for the first time ever. I'll be getting the views of a former deputy leader of the party on that one. I'm Dawn Neeson, and this is The Weekend. So thank you for joining me this afternoon. I really appreciate your company. It's been a hard week for many of us. I know it's been a tough news week. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I promise we do have some fun coming up in the show, including a bit of Burns Night fun as well for you. But the most important thing about this show is you and your views and what you're thinking about all the stories we're discussing or anything else you want to have a chat about. We're here for you. Remember, that's what we're about. It's very simple to get involved. Simply visit gbnews.com/your say and join in our conversation. Keeping me company on the show today, with me all afternoon indeed, political journalist and commentator for Novara Media, Michael Walker, and former Reform UK Deputy Leader Ben Habib. Thank you very much for joining me. But before we get into today's stories, let's get those news headlines with the wonderful Tatiana Sanchez.
Dawn, thank you very much. The top stories this hour: 4 female Israeli soldiers held by terror group Hamas have been released as part of a ceasefire deal that's brought an end to 15 months of fighting in Gaza. They were taken to hospital in Tel Aviv, and we are now hearing in the newsroom that they have already been reunited with their families there. Hostages Karina Ariev, Daniela Gilboa, Nama Levy, all aged 20, and 19-year-old Liri Albag were all serving with the Israel Defense Forces when they were captured. Surrounded by armed Hamas fighters, the women waved and smiled as they were led onto a podium in Gaza City before being guided to Red Cross vehicles, taken to a border point, and then handed to the IDF. Israel has now released the 200 Palestinian prisoners. It's the second exchange since the ceasefire began last weekend. That first wave saw 3 Israeli hostages released, including British-Israeli Emily Damari. Around 185,000 homes and businesses remain without power in Northern Ireland following Storm Éowyn. Heavy rain and strong winds could also bring flooding to parts of the UK this weekend. Up to 80 millimetres of rainfall could be seen in parts of England and Wales, with several amber and yellow warnings issued by the Met Office for today and tomorrow. It comes after winds reached 100 miles per hour yesterday as the storm left one person dead. He's been named today as Casper Dudek. Network Rail have given an update today saying most of its network is now up and running. Farmers from across the UK are staging a national day of unity as tractors prepare to be in convoy throughout Britain in a bid to protect the sector. It comes as pressures mounting on the government to halt the controversial family farm tax that could see some forced to sell their land to foot the bill. The National Farmers Union warned that many farmers are at breaking point and couldn't afford increased bills. Elsewhere, a former actor who was released from prison in error as part of the early release scheme has been convicted of assaulting his ex-partner the day after he was freed. Jason Hogginson, who starred in the 1987 film Empire State, was one of around 1,700 prisoners who walked free on the 10th of September last year as part of the government's plan to ease overcrowding in prisons. But the 53-year-old was one of 37 inmates who were released by mistake when the scheme was rolled out. He has been photographed giving a thumbs up as he left HMP Durham after serving half of an 18-month sentence for assaulting his ex-partner and then breaching a restraining order. In other news, WH Smith is reportedly in secret talks to sell its entire high street businesses in Britain more than 230 years after it opened its first shop in central London. The company's high street arm comprises roughly 500 stores, employing around 5,000 people across the country. WH Smith will reportedly confirm that plan to the London Stock Exchange on Monday morning. Elsewhere, the Tories will push for a ban on smartphones in schools to be included in the government's education bill. The Conservatives are tabling an amendment to the Children's Wellbeing in Schools bill to end the use of mobile phones and other devices during school days by pupils. It's understood that the Labour government has no plans to legislate on banning phones in schools. It would mandate that all schools in England put a policy in place that applies from the start of the day's first lesson to the end of the last. Shadow Education Secretary Laura Trott says we have a growing understanding of how damaging phones and social media are on our children's education. And Buckingham Palace has released a photograph of the King ahead of Burns Night tonight. That photograph, which has been posted on the royal family's X account, shows His Majesty in the library at Balmoral Castle, dressed in the traditional tartan kilt. The caption, wishing those celebrating a very happy Burns Night, is included. Those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, more from me in half an hour.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. We do love a man in a kilt, don't we, Tatiana? OK, let's get straight into today's stories. Farmers across the nation are staging a national day of unity as tractors gather throughout Britain in a bid to protect the sector. It comes as pressure is mounting on the government to halt the controversial family farm tax that could see some forced to sell their land to foot that bill. I'm joined now by farmer and director of Raina Farms, Colin Raina. Colin, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. OK, it looks like where you are is quite busy at the moment. Tell us what's going on there.
Well, we're a group of local farmers today. There's about 12 of us all farm around the Horton and Windsor area, and we're going around visiting Staines, Windsor, Maidenhead, Marlow, and meeting 4 MPs to tell them about the plight of the agricultural industry. We were already on our knees before the Labour government came into power. You know, after 5 years of dreadful weather, COVID, we fed the nation, and then the government's then penalised us with 5 punitive taxes. So we've been driving through Windsor today, and the first time I've ever been clapped. People were getting out their cars, cheering us, clapping us, and the public are supporting us. And what we're saying to the government, go and talk to the President of the National Farmers Union, reconsider these ill-thought-out taxes, because all you're going to do is put food security at risk in the UK, and you can't bite the hand that feeds you. And we are very passionate, and we've got young farmers here today who are scared that they'll never be able to farm because their farms will have to be sold because of death duties and inheritance tax. And we just think it's mean.
Beyond mean, I would certainly agree with that. And what response are you getting from local MPs? I mean, are they happy to meet you? Are they sounding supportive, or are you feel like you're talking to a brick wall?
No, we're meeting 3 Conservative MPs today, and we are meeting 1 Liberal MP today. We wrote to 3 Labour MPs. They wouldn't meet us. And it's a bit shameful of the Labour Party. They should come and speak to us because they've got to speak to grassroots farmers. And, you know, we fed this nation through COVID. I put my family at risk, as well as my people who work for me, to carry on working through COVID. And this is how the Labour government has paid us back. And I just feel they've just got their sums wrong. And they keep talking about rich people buying farms, and it's normally their mates are buying these farms. We don't want them in the market. All they need to do is change the rules, saying that if you buy a farm and you don't farm it, you can't get the tax relief on it. It's simple. But the industry's very worried. I've got 3 daughters who want to carry on farming, and I think they won't be able to. It's just a great shame.
I mean, Colin, how do you feel that, we've had, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves just come back from Davos talking about maybe doing a U-turn on the non-dom tax. She's been banging the drum about for months now, and yet they won't even talk to you. How does that make you feel?
That we don't matter. We're not important. The agricultural industry is not important. And the British people are not important. Just speak to us and explain what you're trying to do. And we've got a good National Farmers Union, the Country Landowner Association. Rachel Reeves won't meet them. I can't believe that. And it always worries me when somebody won't meet somebody.
Oh, well, indeed, at the very least, Colin, talking. But where do you go from now? We've seen protests, we've seen farmers gathering outside the House of Parliament with their tractors, but you're still not getting a response. Where do you go from here?
Well, my view is that we have the public behind us, and we will not stop. And if Rachel Reeves and our Prime Minister think that he can beat the farmers, Napoleon couldn't beat the British farmer. The Germans in the First World War couldn't beat the British farmer, and the Germans couldn't beat the British farmers in the Second World War. So don't pick a fight that you can't win, Mr. Starmer.
Well, exactly. I mean, Colin, you are the ones feeding us. I mean, that is the bottom line with it, isn't it? So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and good luck. That is our farmer and director of Raina Farms, Colin Raina. Thank you very much for that update. I mean, it just doesn't... Why are the government not even talking to them? OK, but we will be coming back to that story later, but for now we're moving on. For the first time, a poll has put Reform UK on top ahead of Labour and Tories. If an election was called tomorrow, the polling company Find Out Now has Reform polling at 26%, the Tories in second at 23%, and Labour trailing behind in third at 22%. OK, let's see what my panel make of this. I still have Michael Walker and Ben Habib with me. Ben, coming to you first on this story for obvious reasons. I mean, are you surprised by this finding?
No, not at all surprised. I mean, Reform UK occupies that bit of political ground that stands unashamedly for the United Kingdom, for British interests, for strong borders, for proud, prosperous, independent, sovereign United Kingdom. And that is something that the nation has been crying out for since at least 2016, when we voted to leave the European Union, and has repeatedly been let down by successive governments, with the particular form of governance that we practice having been kicked into action by Tony Blair in 1997. You know, the grandfather, if you like, of the liberal global order in the United Kingdom. And Reform UK stands against all of that. And so it doesn't surprise me at all, particularly given where Labour's taken this country in 6 months.
What do you make of it, Michael?
I suppose in a way it's not a surprise when you look at the other parties. So the Conservatives are completely discredited. They were in power for 14 years. I think most people felt poorer by the end of it. A party who sort of talked tough on immigration and then had the highest net migration ever. So it's going to be very difficult for them to come back in the immediate term. I mean, the big disappointment for Labour is that they're very unpopular already. They've made some massive political errors. I think the farmers' tax is one of them. I also think the winter fuel payments is one of them. I mean, I think Labour were a little bit short-sighted when, I mean, I spoke about this earlier, before the election they ruled out raising any of the big taxes, and so they've gone for all the small taxes, hope no one would notice, and actually people notice those more because they feel personally attacked. They also don't seem to have too much revision when it comes to the economy. So Labour have a lot to worry about here. Of course, when you've got percentages like that, it's very difficult to predict how that would cash out in any general election, because we have a sort of parliamentary system which is designed to have two main parties, both at something like 35 to 40%, when you've got three parties.
So do you think it's time for a change, to change the system?
Well, I mean, I've always been in favour of proportional representation. I think proportional representation would be a great thing, because you then have the negotiations out in the open. You recognise that we have a public which is very much divided. They don't fit into those two categories of centre-left and centre-right, which is Labour and the Conservatives. So you do need proportional representation. Then, I mean, if there were elections tomorrow, you'd probably have negotiations between Reform and the Conservatives, and they'd have to come to some kind of agreement. Obviously, I'd prefer the situation where there was Labour and the Greens and the Lib Dems came to some kind of agreement. But at least it's a bit more honest that way, I think.
Do you think, I mean, proportional representation would be a good idea?
I'm dead against proportional representation.
Right,
and the reason I'm dead against it is because the electorate, therefore, never gets what it voted for. Michael described it. He said if Reform UK and Conservatives were standing under a PR system, they'd have to do a deal. Well, that means that the Conservatives would have to give up part of their agenda, Reform would have to give up part of their agenda, and no one's going to get what they voted for. And I think part of the problem with British democracy is that Parliament hasn't delivered what the British people want. And in my view, Michael may disagree, but in my view, the British people have repeatedly voted for small c conservatism, a rejection of large state, big interference, large taxation, high regulation, the global liberal order, the dumbing down of our democracy through quangos. We voted against all of that, and they haven't got it. What we need is a party that stands for this country, to win under the first-past-the-post system, get a thumping majority, and then deliver the agenda, frankly, that Donald Trump is delivering for the United States of America.
Do you think Reform is that party?
Reform is winning the air war. It is winning the hearts and minds of the British people. The problem Reform's got, it's got two major problems. The first is, this is an ideological problem, and I was speaking to Michael about it in the break, it's tacking to the centre ground in order to hoover up votes. That's not why Reform exists. Reform mustn't tack to the centre ground. It is taking a moderate position on issues. For example, Nigel Farage is on the record saying he hasn't got a problem with the rapidly changing demography of this country. He's on the record saying that he doesn't support mass deportation of illegal migrants. He's on the record saying that he would want a referendum on the ECHR, not remove the ECHR. And what we need is...
All of those things you disagree with.
I disagree with all of that. I'm very concerned about the rapidly changing demography. I think all illegal migrants should be detained and deported, even if it's a very difficult process.
Very much like Trump's doing. We're seeing people get on the plane.
And that's what the British people want. So I think that's one challenge for Reform. The other challenge it's got is it simply doesn't have the national infrastructure to deliver government. It hasn't got the campaigners, it hasn't got the members, it hasn't got councillors, MPs and so on. And the route it's taking to address that problem is to recruit as many Tories as possible, including some who look, feel and behave as part of the liberal global order that Reform is meant to be ejecting. So, for example, we had Charlie Mullins the other day saying that he'd spoken to Nigel and he was going to be a candidate for Reform. Well, Charlie Mullins is a committed Remainer. Now, people can change their minds, but if you're a Remainer and you're still a Remainer, you're endorsing that liberal global order against which Reform UK stands. So, Reform needs to... What I think Nigel needs to do is have much more faith in the British people, in his own membership, and he should be growing organically, making sure that the membership grows in the way that it had been growing before he became leader, and use them as a democratic base for the party to deliver good candidates to the fore, good policies, and then stand by those policies.
Do you think he's taken his eye off the original Reform goals ball just because he's going to get more votes and potentially be the next Prime Minister?
Absolutely. That's what's happening.
Interesting, interesting. Would you consider starting your own party up to take him on?
There's no room for another party. There's no room for another party. I mean...
But if there was, would you?
Well, right now, what I want to see is I want to see governance for this country that delivers a proud, prosperous, independent, united kingdom. That is the bedrock on which all my political philosophy is based, and I don't really care how we get that government. I just want to get that government.
OK. What do you make of what you've just heard there, Michael? I mean, Reform are probably too centrist. They're not enough to the right.
Well, I mean, I suppose I'm reassured in a way by what Ben Habib is saying, because I suppose there is an attempt in the United States by Donald Trump to really shift the Overton window and to, I suppose, create a culture where we sort of question, do we want to have a multicultural society? Do we want to mass deport people?
Now, illegal migrants.
Yeah, illegal. But the point is, and why, I mean, it's so controversial in the American system, is because illegal migrants might be people who've been here for 10 years, who have kids and have jobs, right? So the consensus in the UK and America has basically been that if you've built a life here, if you've got kids here, for example, you can probably stay here. And I suppose there is a move on the right, sort of the Donald Trumpian right, which is to say, no, if you're illegal, you go. And also to say, actually, we're reopening some questions about race that might have been parked. I think, you know, for good reason. So I hope Nigel Farage doesn't want to sort of reopen those questions. I think it's perfectly legitimate. If you want to reduce migration, fine, great. If you want to sort of fundamentally question whether we should remain a multicultural society, I've got more problems with that.
OK, just one question I want to ask. Sorry, I've lost your name there. You messaged in. During the Southport trial earlier on, we heard someone say diversity is our strength. Would you agree with that statement?
I mean, we are a diverse society, and I think we work quite well.
Is that a strength?
I suppose it comes with pros and cons. It's probably a strength and a weakness at the same time.
OK.
I wholly disagree with Michael. I think diversity of thought is great. Taking on new forms of thought, which we debate with and then perhaps we integrate somehow and we evolve collectively, is good. That's how civilizations progress. That's the evolution of a culture and evolution of thinking. But what we've got in this country and the way we've practiced multiculturalism is to bring in different cultures and multiple different cultures. Well, I'm not just talking about Islam, for example. I'm talking about multiple different cultures. We've put a protective blanket around each individual culture, and we've said you don't have to integrate. We've got no program for integration. In fact, our culture and our peoples will take the knee, if necessary, to your culture. We will promote your culture. We'll promote your people. We'll even create a regulatory and legal framework through which you will get jobs ahead of those people who are already here. You will get promotions. Fighter pilots by the RAF are being recruited on ethnic grounds. They're not being recruited on their ability to fly a plane. So I'm very happy with an evolving culture, but it has to be a settled, homogeneous culture. We can't have this multiculturalism, which I see as division, not diversity.
OK, interesting. Let me know what you think about that. gbnews.com/your say. Ben or Michael or somewhere in between, what do you think? For all the best analysis and opinion on that story and more, please do go to our website, which is gbnews.com. I'm Dawn Neeson. This is GB News, and there's loads more coming up on today's show. 4 female hostages arrive in Israel after being released by Hamas. It comes as 200 Palestinian prisoners are also freed. These were the scenes you can see on your screen there just a few minutes ago from the West Bank. Scenes of jubilation there. As you can see, they are not only seen to joy in Tel Aviv, these are actually Palestinians too celebrating. We're live on the ground with that story there very soon. All of that and much more to come. This is GB News, Britain's news channel. We'll see you soon.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Lauren, let's start with this, shall we? How children's TV may be harming, not helping young minds.
Yeah, so this is an article in the Express today, a big double-page spread as a result of some new research in a new book that's coming out by a child psychologist, saying that children's television, and I think perhaps more importantly, the way that children consume television and video product now is perhaps not as healthy for them as we would hope it would be. And there's quite some distance from children's television of the past, of the sort of the Bagpuss and Clangers and Ivor the Engine era. And I think what's interesting about this is particularly the how children's television is consumed angle, because children are now put in front of screens significantly more often than they were, certainly when I think we were growing up. The content that they are consuming is not great for their brains and their learning and development, which Floella Benjamin of children's television fame is now leading a big crusade to say that some of this is really, really bad for children.
These days, they're not watching the TV that we all watched when we were growing up. They're not even watching GB News in the morning.
What are they thinking?
Would you believe it? But they are watching this absolute drivel all day long on YouTube, and because obviously all our TVs are now connected to the internet, or they're getting TikTok on their TV. It's not even, so they don't even necessarily have to have smartphones or iPads. They can just watch this stuff on TV, and it is rubbish. They are watching it and they're obsessed with it. Oh God, Skibbity Toilet or something. Have you heard of this?
No.
No? Well, you'll have viewers who have got who are parents of sort of 13-year-olds, and this Skibbity Toilet thing is, they're all obsessed with it, and this is a really annoying sort of theme tune or thing that they sing at you.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back to The Weekend with me, Dawn Neeson. Thank you for your company this afternoon. OK, let's return to the story that's dominated the headlines for the past week. The guilty plea and subsequent sentencing of Axel Rudakubana, who faces 52 years in prison for the cold-blooded murders of Elsie Dot Stankham, BB King and Alesta Silva Aguirre. And you can see their gorgeous little faces there on the screen, because I'm not showing you his picture anymore, because we don't need to see it, do we? Shocking revelations emerged about ricin links, deleted internet history and various mental health failings before the attack. Not just mental health failings, I would add there, various authority failings. I'm joined now by writer and journalist Charlie Bentley Astor, who has covered this case from the word go. Charlie, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Appreciate it. Now, you have covered this story from the word go. Just sum up how you're feeling about where we are now with it.
I'm incensed. Obviously, the sentence that was handed down was as best as we could possibly have hoped for. You weren't going to get much more within the legal constraints that we have for Rudakubana. So this has been a great relief, I know, to a lot of families who weren't expecting to get this sentence handed out. And it was an additional good news that the judge sort of said that it's unlikely he's ever going to get to leave, even once he reaches the age of 70, which is when he can expect to apply for parole. But obviously, the more days ahead that has passed since this sentencing was handed down, we discovered more and more and more and more failings on behalf of the police, the state, local authorities. It's just unforgivable. We were told that there were opportunities missed. This is a flat-out lie. There was time after time after time, the warning signals were ignored, and we need to know why they were ignored.
Indeed, I mean, you were actually taken to task over, you know, your very strong opinions on social media for saying, well, we need answers to these questions. And many people now, Charlie, are agreeing with you. I feel personally there are so many questions that I don't feel I'm going to get an answer to now. And it's still making people very angry. I mean, sort of like, you know, you've spoken, you know, quite strongly about the riots that we saw, and you got stick for that as well. But now, I mean, we are where we are, and lots of people are more angry than before the trial.
Yes, people underestimated just how devastating and horrific this attack was. We've never really seen anything like it within our living memory. Obviously, there was the Manchester Arena attack, which was upon little girls. We also saw things like the London Bridge attack and the Westminster Bridge attack. But the detail that the public has been given in relation to this case, in relation specifically to what these little girls suffered, is unprecedented. There's no excuse now to not have the truth in every single detail. We need to know exactly how the state failed. When Nigel Farage, who was one of the few MPs who sort of championed transparency in this case, stepped forward on Thursday night and said, well, the cover-up is now over, we can now all move on. I thought, no, hang on a minute. The cover-up is over when the public have no more questions that need to be answered, not when our politicians tell us you don't need to ask questions anymore.
And what's your main question? What would you want an answer to?
What is it about Rudakubana's case that meant that he was looked over so many times? Well, in fact, he wasn't looked over. He was being dealt with local authorities. He'd encountered police. He'd already had a prosecution for bringing in a knife. He'd been thrown out of school twice. You know, there's now evidence coming out he was in children's homes. He was being dealt with chronically by the state. Why the hell was he at home where only his parents had supervision over him? And why, even in the week before this devastating attack, he was en route to attack his own school. He didn't succeed in that. That should have been it. He should have been banged up right there and then, detained in a youth custody centre, and never let to see the light of day until someone had addressed his severe issues, be they mental or his home situation, whatever it is that has contributed to this. He shouldn't have been released into the public square until this was dealt with, if it ever could have been.
I mean, Keir Starmer says that he wants to draw a line in the sand now. Do you think he owes the people of Southport and those families an apology?
An apology is insufficient. I think most people actually want Keir Starmer and his ilk to just go away, just commission the searches that need to be done and sit down and get on with other business, because Keir Starmer had his opportunity to make the depths of his shared grief known to the nation when he turned up to lay flowers one road away from where this attack had taken place. He was there for 19 seconds. He threw down that reef practically. His eyes were darting around as if he knew he was about to go onto a national stage and lie to the nation about who this kid was and the severity of these murders. We can't forgive that. We don't want our politicians. What I want to hear is how locals and victims were affected. Now, I'm sure in their own time, they will be ready to say these things, but that's who I want to hear the story from. Not our politicians, not authorities who dealt with him, from the people who have suffered at his hands, whether it be this attack or any instance beforehand.
Charlie, just finally one brief question. Would you say that Ruda Cabana is not the only one that has blood on his hands in this case?
Yes, you know, I understand the difficulty that a lot of these services are under. They've got a bureaucratic sheet where it's like, well, that he doesn't tick this one box, ergo we can't do this. I understand the constraint that these authorities are under. For example, he was a Category 4 in social services. That is the highest you can be. It means you're encountering all the kinds of authorities that you can. He was downgraded to a Category 3, given a Category 3 officer who's not prepared to deal with the severity of a person who is a Category 4, because there were, quote, 100 people on our case books and we didn't have the resources. I understand the kind of guilt that those people must be harbouring, and it's not those people specifically that I want to attack. It's the people who are at the top who make the decision, who go, OK, he doesn't meet all the check boxes, but we need to keep an eye on this. Or, OK, there's no resources for that, but let's pull it off of this or put in an application. It's the people who knew. I mean, Keir Starmer came out and said this was a knife attack on the day of the attack. No one who now knows the details considers this a knife attack. That is a one-on-one attack. So anyone who covered this up or was complicit at any stage definitely has blood on their hands. Absolutely, Dawn.
Thank you very much. That's writer and journalist Charlie Bentley-Astor, who's covered the horrific case of the Southport little girls. Thank you very much, Charlie. I'm Dawn Neeson. This is GB News, and there's loads more coming up on today's show. We're discussing the release of 4 more Israeli hostages following the ceasefire deal. But first, let's get those news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Dawn, thank you. And yes, 4 female Israeli soldiers held by terror group Hamas have been released as part of a ceasefire deal that's brought an end to 15 months of brutal fighting in Gaza. They were then taken to hospital in Tel Aviv, and we now know that they've already been reunited with their families there. Surrounded by armed Hamas fighters, the women waved and smiled as they were led onto a podium in Gaza City upon their release, before being guided to Red Cross vehicles, taken to a border point and then handed to the IDF. Israel has now released 200 Palestinian prisoners. It's the second exchange since the ceasefire began last weekend. The first wave saw 3 Israeli hostages released, including British-Israeli Emily Damari. Around 185,000 homes and businesses remain without power in Northern Ireland following Storm Éowyn. Heavy rain and strong winds could also bring flooding to parts of the UK this weekend. Up to 80 millimetres of rainfall could be seen in parts of England and Wales, with several amber and yellow warnings issued by the Met Office. It comes after winds reached 100 miles per hour yesterday, as the storm also left a person dead. He's been named today as Cuthbert Dudek. Network Rail have given an update today, saying most of its network is now back up and running. And farmers from across the UK are staging a National Day of Unity as tractors prepare to be in convoy throughout Britain in a bid to protect the sector. It comes as pressures mounting on the government to halt the controversial family farm tax that could see some forced to sell their land to foot the bill. The National Farmers Union warned that many farmers were at breaking point and couldn't afford increased bills. Those are the latest headlines for now. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. Storm Eowyn brought plenty of disruption to end the working week, and there's still some changeable weather on the way as we head through the rest of the weekend. Storm Eowyn, though, moving away towards the northeast, towards Scandinavia, and then we see this weather front arriving through the rest of Saturday and into the start of Sunday, bringing some outbreaks of showery rain. But before we get there, there will be plenty of sunshine on offer through Saturday afternoon for many of us. Still some isolated showers across much of Scotland, these likely falling as sleet and snow over the hills, and still rather windy across the Northern Isles, gusts here of 50 to 60 miles an hour to end the day on Saturday. Temperatures will be round about average for most of us, although definitely feeling chilly where you're exposed to that breeze further north. As we then go through Saturday evening, we see that band of showery rain arriving across western parts of the UK. So across Northern Ireland first and into parts of western Scotland, again turning to sleet and snow over any high ground, but eastern Scotland generally staying a little drier through this evening with some clear skies to start. For Northern Ireland, we do see those blustery showers though, and again we could see some sleet and snow over the hills, and it'll be turning rather windy on this weather front as it pushes its way eastwards. For much of England, a dry start to the night, but further west we see that showery rain arriving, some quite heavy downpours likely on this as it spreads its way eastwards into the early hours of Sunday morning. It starts to fizzle out by the time it gets to eastern parts of England, but we could see some sleet and snow over the high ground across the parts of the Pennines, but then generally turning drier behind, and we could see some clear skies developing, allowing temperatures to drop quite widely, particularly across Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland. Some frost likely and perhaps some ice in places, but generally a little bit of a milder start further south. We see some clouds starting to build, and all eyes down towards the southwest as we see this next weather front pushing up from the southwest, spreading its way north and eastwards, bringing some quite heavy rainfall to parts of southwest England, parts of Wales, even into parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England too, and some strong winds likely as we go through Sunday afternoon. Temperatures again around about average for the time of year, but some milder air just being brought up across the southwest.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the weekend with me, Dawn Neeson. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch about the interview we just did with Charlie Bentley Astor, who's a writer and journalist who's covered the Ruda Cabana case from day one. Just going to read a few of your comments out. Patricia says, Dawn, your guest Charlie speaks eloquently and says it absolutely right. Meanwhile, Jero says, goodness, the most eloquent and passionate delivery I've heard for a long while. Every word, bar none, counted. Well done. The interview needs to be repeated updated every hour for a week. And Rob says, now the awful trial is over and the case is closed. We must be told everything about this man's past. And that is exactly what Charlie was saying. And PW says, well said, Charlie. So do get in touch, gbnews.com/your say about Charlie's interview or anything else you want to talk about today. Now, the other big story today is Hamas releasing 4 female Israeli soldiers surrounded by armed fighters. The women were led onto a podium in Gaza City where they waved and smiled before they were guided to Red Cross vehicles waiting to take them to a border point to be handed over to the IDF. It's now been confirmed they are back in Israel. You can see them waving there. That was when they were first released. Joining us now from Tel Aviv is journalist Natalie Blenford. Natalie, thank you very much. Natalie, are you there? Natalie? She's joining us very soon. Oh. Natalie, there you are. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Natalie, just tell us what the mood is like in Tel Aviv today.
Well, it's certainly one of happiness, celebration, relief. Just all the positive adjectives. I was out earlier this morning after the release, getting a coffee, and you can just see it's palpable. People are happy. These young women, they represent the best of Israel. Every single hostage here matters, but particularly because army service is mandatory. It's something people do. It's not a choice. You do it. You just do it for 2 to 3 years. And these girls really represent the sort of heart of Israel, and the fact that they're now home, safe in the arms of their parents, is a great relief for everybody today.
Natalie, do we know anything about their condition? They looked relatively healthy when we saw the handover earlier on today. Do we know any more about their condition? Are they going to be kept in hospital? Will they be seeing their families straight away?
So yes, they're already with their families, but they are going to be in hospital. They've been flown by helicopter to a hospital, I believe, in a suburb called Petach Tikva, which is just outside of Tel Aviv, and they'll be there for a good few days. The female hostages who were released last Sunday are still in their hospital. So I think around 5 to 7 days is the sort of expected stay. Obviously, this depends on their condition. So what we can tell you is that they were all able to walk. They were all smiling to a point. And of course, we don't know the reason for the smiling. They may have been ordered to smile.
Yeah.
But I will say that moments before they were released, I received a notification from the Hostage Families Forum, which is the sort of pressure group that's been representing the families. And it specifically said, please do not stream images if the images are distressing. And I think they were quite concerned that these girls wouldn't be able to walk, that they might be in wheelchairs or they might be missing limbs. That what people have to remember is we haven't seen them for 477 days. A couple of them appeared in propaganda videos, but it was only from the sort of waist up, under duress, filmed in the dark. We didn't know that they were going to be in such good condition. So obviously there is a great relief that they are. But of course, the toll of being in captivity, surrounded by armed fighters in tunnels for 477 days, this is something else that is not visible. So this is what the doctors will be trying to find out in the next few days, as well as testing all their vitals, checking them for all kinds of, infections and anything they could have picked up. So we'll know more soon.
Yeah. Obviously, one of the most horrific, certainly every woman watching it will never forget that picture of Noma when she was taken, dragged into the back of that truck in her blood-stained clothing. No one will ever forget that image. To see her smiling, obviously she's surrounded by armed men, she's going to be smiling and waving, but to see her looking as healthy as we think she is in those pictures, it is just a real blessing.
It is. It's a huge relief. I think the Nama example is that you're right to mention, because it's iconic, that image. She had hands tied in cable ties. She was covered in blood. We still don't know to this day why she was covered in blood. I mean, what people may have forgotten is that they just witnessed all their cohort being massacred. The blood, there's speculation it came from sexual assault. It could also have come from being sat there for hours in a pool of blood. It was, the mind boggles, even now, all these days later, as you think about what they witnessed. It's interesting that they came out dressed in uniforms. They weren't abducted in uniforms. They were abducted in pajamas, blood-soaked jogging bottoms. Hamas has this idea of them as soldiers, as military people. So they've sort of dressed them in this kind of costume. But that's not what they were taken in. That's something Hamas believes, OK, they're soldiers, let's dress them in an army uniform of sorts. It's not real.
OK. And Natalie, obviously there are many hostages still being held. No one knows for sure how many are indeed still alive. What is the feeling there now about those that are still being held by Hamas?
Well, there's a lot of concern. I think the men we haven't got anywhere near to releasing the men yet. So we don't know the condition of some of them, or of many of them actually. It still feels a long way away before we'll get them back, because most of them are scheduled, the younger ones certainly, for the second phase of this release deal. And there's a lot of concern about the Bibas family.
Yes.
Shiri and her 2 young redheaded boys, who are civilians, and obviously the boys are minors. So they are the most humanitarian of the humanitarian cases, but they haven't been released. And another female civilian, Arbel Yehud, was meant to be released today, and actually she wasn't. So now there's a special discussion going on between Hamas and Israel, probably via mediators, I imagine, to say Arbel needs to be released before Gazans are allowed to go back to North Gaza, because there was a key part of the deal was that all female civilians would be released before Gazans could go back to the north. So there's now new talk about whether they'll come home whether she will come home, in the next 2 days. There is concern because until you're out of Hamas captivity, you're not safe. This is something the families want everyone to understand. Anything can happen at any moment. And even now that we're in a ceasefire, so there's less risk from IDF action, but look at the number of guns surrounding these women.
Yeah,
anything
no,
can
indeed.
happen, and they're powerless, they're unarmed. So let's assume all Israelis who are hostages are all unarmed, surrounded by people with weapons. So you see anything can happen. So it's not over till they're back. And that's something that the families want everyone to remember, like urgency is key here.
Of course. Natalie, thank you very much for joining us on the very emotional day. That's Natalie Blenford, Tel Aviv journalist. Thank you very much. And if you are in search of some winter sun to cheer yourself up, and let's face it, who isn't at the moment, let's get that forecast for you for some of our top European holiday destinations.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
More showers to come across Cyprus this weekend, although it does look drier by Monday. There's more wet weather to come across parts of Spain and Portugal too. There are those showers clearing by Monday. Plenty of fine and sunny weather over the central Mediterranean. Good looking day on Sunday across Sicily and Sardinia. Some sunshine for the Balearics, but more rain heading into southern Spain and Portugal. Plenty of sunshine in the Canaries this weekend, and things are warming up into the mid-20s on Monday in Tenerife.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
An absolute monster. It took Chloe and Sean Ing 90 minutes to reel in this gigantic 8-foot-long monster fish from Chigborough Fisheries in Essex. And upon weighing this enormous marine beast, it was found to have been 7 pounds heavier than the existing British record, a 143-pound catfish caught also in Essex. But as I understand it, you actually went for a Chinese meal when fate struck. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. So I was fishing an area of Chigborough where you have to fish at a fair distance. So I cast my rods out and then we ordered a Chinese. And yeah, so I got the bite at about 10 to 8 at night. And then about 20 minutes into it, my phone started ringing, the Chinese guys at the gate with my delivery. So I had to send a couple of guys off to go and get it. And then, yeah, the fight, obviously, you can't just stop the fight to go and get your Chinese. So, yeah, the fight went on, for about an hour and a half in total. There's no net in the world that's big enough for this fish. So we had to send out first of all, I sent out a mate, Alex. He went out there to go and basically use what we call a sling. So that's a safe apparatus that we use to take the fish out of the water. He then went and he turned around and he was like, we're going to need another sling. So then we sent out another friend with a sling, and these slings are 4 foot long each. So then we had the catfish wrapped up in 2 slings, and it was still slightly longer than that. And then we got to a point where we was like, now we've got to try and get it out of the water to photo, to weigh it, because obviously we knew then that it was possibly going to be a UK record.
GB News.
Join me, Camila, Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camila Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the weekend with me, Dawn Neeson. Now, we are going to be, because I haven't given Michael and Ben enough time to talk, and it's normally quite difficult to shut both of them up, to be honest with you. We are going to go back now to the interview we did earlier on with the writer Charlie Bentley Astor over the Rudakabana case. Charlie had some very, very strong viewpoints there about she has many, many questions that she wants answering about this case. She doesn't feel like, as a journalist and as an ordinary member of the public, she is satisfied by what we have heard so far. Ben, what do you make of what she had to say?
Well, I completely agree with her. I think that so many questions remain unanswered about the Rudakabana case. And there are many parallels, by the way, with the gang rape gangs. In the way that our institutions didn't move to protect these young girls before the crime took place. And then, again, in the way that our institutions moved to hide what had happened. The truth only really came out when the sentencing took place.
Why do you think they did that? Because we've had many, many lawyers on GB News and other programmes saying there were no legal reasons that various facts could not have been released earlier than they were.
Absolutely. And Lindsay Hoyle getting up in Parliament and saying we can't discuss anything to do with this was absolutely wrong. You can have a discussion in Parliament about what was known by the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, Merseyside Police. When did they come to know it? Those are perfectly legitimate questions to be asked in Parliament, and any parliamentarian worth his mettle would have ignored Lindsay Hoyle and raised those questions under the protection of privilege, which they had the right to do. But it comes down to this, and we discussed it, we touched on it in an earlier part of this segment, this programme, it's this. There's a fear in this country of calling out ethnic minorities. There's a protective blanket across ethnic minorities. And the reason I think Rudakabana wasn't robustly intercepted before his killing was because the authorities were nervous of being accused of racism. There's a fear of that. And the reason Starmer effectively covered it up, and in my view, by covering it up, caused extreme speculation, which resulted in the protests, which resulted in the riots, and then he directed the criminal justice system to arrest the far right and throw them all in jail. The reason he did all of that is because he's hijacked by the same ideology. Okay. He hasn't got the courage to tell the truth, because he's wed to this multicultural, protect those who've come to this country, celebrate their cultures, and we mustn't ever show that that ain't working.
Michael, just very, very quickly, we are running out of time, unfortunately, sorry, but what do you make of it? What you've heard Ben say, what you heard Charlie say?
It seems very, very speculative to say that there was anything to do with sort of multiculturalism here, because, the issue why this hasn't been classified as a terrorist act, which I think is important to say, is because he doesn't seem to have had any coherent ideology. So we did have an Al-Qaeda manual. He also seemed very interested in Hitler.
Well, we don't actually know that yet, because detectives have said, sorry to interrupt, have said today, it could be years before the tech giants release his full internet history. So we don't actually know entirely what he was looking at.
Well, we know in part because sort of teachers told Prevent, right? So we do know that he had a very eclectic sort of interest in violence in general.
Michael, I'm going to have to interrupt you, but we are coming back to this story later in the show, so don't go anywhere. But first, let's get the weather, and here it is for you.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. It's going to stay quite changeable as we head over the rest of the weekend and into the start of the new working week. Low pressure always close by to the UK, bringing some wet and windy weather at times. Stormy Owen, that brought disruption through Friday, clears away towards Scandinavia. Then we've got this weather front arriving through Saturday evening and into the start of Sunday, bringing some outbreaks of quite heavy and showery rain across parts of Northern Ireland, and then later into parts of Scotland, Northern England, parts of Wales too. It generally fizzles out by the time it gets towards eastern England, and we will see some clear skies developing behind. And under those clear skies, likely to turn quite chilly, particularly across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland, seeing some frost and perhaps some icy stretches through Sunday morning. A touch milder across the very far south, although temperatures still dropping down into the low single figures. But a bit of cloud then building across the southwest. We see this weather front arriving, pushing its way north and eastwards, bringing some quite heavy downpours across parts of Devon and Cornwall through the early hours of Sunday morning. A bit of a dry start for the rest of England, and for Northern Ireland and Scotland, generally quite a dry, bright and chilly start to the day on Sunday. Some showers still continuing across the very far north of Scotland. Again, these likely falling as sleet and snow over any high ground. That weather front across the very far southwest pushes its way north and eastwards through Sunday morning and into the afternoon. That heavy rain then spreading across parts of Northern Ireland, parts of Northern England and later into parts of Scotland too. Turning really quite blustery as well behind that weather front, some heavy and blustery showers pushing in from the southwest. Temperatures will be round about average for the time of year for most of us, although generally staying a little bit milder across the south as we see some milder air brought in. Across Scotland, it will be a dry and bright afternoon, but that rain eventually reaches them through Sunday evening, likely to turn to sleet and snow over the high ground. And then we've got another weather front just pushing across the south of the UK. Again, some heavy downpours likely here. Generally remaining unsettled through the first part of next week, but there are some hints that we're likely to see high pressure starting to build, although perhaps turning a little chilly.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win our biggest cash prize so far, £50,000 in tax-free cash. How would you react if you won?
We won 25,000. I'd say don't hesitate, do it. If you're not in it, you've got no chance of winning it.
Don't miss out as lines close on Friday. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Dubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camila, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camila Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 2 o'clock on Saturday, the 25th of January, and this is the weekend on GB News. Now, the National Farmers Union is staging a day of unity throughout the afternoon in protest against the government's family farm tax. We've got reporters on the ground and we're speaking to farmers throughout the show on that story. And it is a day of celebration in the Middle East as 4 female Israeli hostages arrived back in Tel Aviv. That's the second group freed by Hamas since a ceasefire was agreed, and we've seen scenes of joy and jubilation. We're live on the ground with that breaking story for you too. And Reform UK has pulled ahead of both Labour and the Conservatives to top a national poll alone for the first time ever. I'll be getting the latest reaction on that one too. I'm Jordan Eastham, and this is The Weekend. So thank you for joining me on this very busy Saturday afternoon. I really appreciate your company and your comments, because this show is indeed all about you. So let me know your thoughts on all the stories we're discussing today, or anything you want to talk about. This is your show, remember, never forget that. Very simple to get involved. Simply visit gbnews.com/yoursay and join in our conversation. Keeping me company on the show today is political journalist and commentator for Novara Media, Michael Walker, and former Reform UK Deputy Leader Ben Habib, who have both been very, very vocal already. You don't want to, if you can catch up on what they've said, but they've got more to come, believe me. But before we get into today's stories, let's get those news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Dawn, thank you. The top stories from the GB newsroom: 4 female Israeli soldiers held by terror group Hamas have been released today as part of a ceasefire deal that's brought an end to 15 months of fighting. They were then taken to hospital in Tel Aviv. We now know they have already been reunited with their families. Surrounded by armed Hamas fighters, the women waved and smiled as they were led onto a podium in Gaza City upon their release, before being guided to Red Cross vehicles, taken to a border point and then handed to the IDF. Israel has now released 200 Palestinian prisoners. It's the second exchange since the ceasefire began last weekend. The first wave saw 3 Israeli hostages released, including British-Israeli Emily Damari. In other news, the Met Office says Storm Eowyn was probably the strongest storm to hit the UK in at least 10 years. Around 185,000 homes and businesses remain without power in Northern Ireland following the storm. Up to 80 millimetres of rainfall could also be seen in parts of England and Wales, with several amber and yellow warnings issued by the Met Office over today and tomorrow. It comes after winds reached 100 miles per hour yesterday, as the storm also left a person dead. He's been named today as Casper Dudek. Network Rail have given an update today, saying most of its network is now back up and running. Farmers from across the UK are staging a national day of unity in a bid to protect the sector. It comes as pressures mounting on the government to halt the controversial family farm tax that could see some forced to sell their land to foot the bill. The National Farmers Union warned that many farmers were at breaking point and couldn't afford increased bills. A former actor who was released from prison in error as part of the early release scheme has been convicted of assaulting his ex-partner the day after he was freed. Jason Hogginson, who starred in the 1987 film Empire State, was one of around 1,700 prisoners who walked free on the 10th of September last year as part of the government's plan to ease overcrowding. But the 53-year-old was one of 37 inmates who were released by mistake when the scheme was rolled out. He was photographed giving a thumbs up as he left HMP Durham after serving half of an 18-month sentence for assaulting his ex-partner and then breaching a restraining order. In other news, WH Smith is reportedly in secret talks to sell its entire high street business in Britain, more than 230 years after it opened its first shop in central London. The company's high street arms comprises roughly 500 stores, employing around 5,000 people across the country. WH Smith will reportedly confirm the plan to the London Stock Exchange on Monday morning. And Buckingham Palace has released a photograph of King Charles ahead of Burns Night tonight. The photograph, which has been posted on the royal family's X account, shows His Majesty in the library at Balmoral Castle, dressed in the traditional tartan kilt. The caption, wishing those celebrating a very happy Burns Night, is included. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More from me in half an hour.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. Much discussion here about Prince Charles's kilt, which is very fetching, I find. So, OK, let's get straight into today's story. The farmers across the nation are staging a national day of unity as tractors gather throughout Britain in a bid to protect the sector. It comes as pressure is mounting on the government to halt the controversial family farm tax that could see some forced to sell their land simply to foot their tax bill. Well, joining us now from Lisbon is GB News Northern Ireland reporter Doogie Beattie. Doogie, well, good to see you today.
Yes, hello and welcome.
How's it going there?
Yeah. Well, you can just see behind me one of the many tractor runs is starting here as we speak, and this is all about inheritance tax and the protest that's around it. And joining me now is Wesley Aston of the Chief Executive of the Ulster Farmers Union. Wesley, how many of these events are here today?
Well, certainly in Northern Ireland we have one in every county, so that's 6. And obviously we're part of a wider UK demonstration at this particular stage to show how big an issue this is across the whole UK.
And do you think the government's listening to you?
I think if we had already indication from the government that they would engage us, we wouldn't have to do this. But unfortunately we have. This is the start of many measures that we hope will introduce until such times as the government actually engage with us.
Well, I mean, most people will say, look at the price of these tractors, but these tractors are part of a business. I mean, how would they operate without them?
Very much so, and I think the farmers will actually tell you if they want to take on the payments for the tractors, that's fine. You know, these things aren't cheap, but unfortunately they're parts of the tools of trade.
And of course, these tractors make them produce at a better cost. But I mean, what sort of money is in one of these units?
Oh, one of these tractors is £100,000 easy, and that's something that we have to do as part of our investment in the industry going forward and our commitment to that industry.
Well, best of luck with today, Wesley. And I hope that the government listens to what you have to say.
So do we.
Well, you can see what's happening here today. It is a marvellous sight. There's two districts in County Down here, Banbridge and Saintfield. These are splitting off into 2 different protests and going either way, one round Banbridge, one round the Saintfield district. And it must be said that farming has even more problems on it. This week we've heard that Smallenberg, 70% of the flock in Scotland has been found to have Smallenberg. That will of course put the price of lamb and mutton up this year and have a serious effect on farm incomes come March, April when the lambing season starts. But really government now have to listen, and this is a way of farmers trying to keep the public on board, trying to not disrupt the public, because the public I do think at this stage really does realise, Don, just what is at cost here. Because if you put these inheritance taxes on farms, what will really happen is they will just put it onto the food and it will go back to the consumer anyway. Margaret Thatcher realised that in 1984, but that's the problem we can pinpoint when inheritance tax started to look for pension companies and banks to buy land. That's when the price of land shot up. So if the Chancellor wants to really pinpoint those people that are buying land and avoiding inheritance tax, she can just look to 84 when quotas and subsidies were put in land and big investment companies started buying up that land.
Thank you very much, Doogie, bringing us up to date with the farmers' protest in Northern Ireland, in Lisbon. Thank you very much, Doogie, there. And very noisy as well. Good, lots of support, and that's exactly what we should be doing. It never ceases to amaze me that everyone seems surprised that the food we get off our supermarket shelves comes from our farmers. Actually, a lot of it doesn't, because we're actually producing less and less of our own food. And if this carries on, it's actually not going to get any better. So let's see what my panel make of this. Political journalist and commentator for Novara Media, Michael Walker, and former Reform UK leader, Ben Habib. I'm going to come to you, Michael, first, because we had to cut you off earlier on, but we are giving you lots of time to talk this time round. We've heard from Doogie there. We've heard from various farmers across the countryside today about how they feel the government aren't listening. They're not even engaging to them.
Well, if you want people to sort of pay attention to your process, it is great to have access to a few tractors, isn't it? Because it does make it much more, I suppose, telegenic protest when you can see big tractors.
They're very expensive tractors, though. That's a very important point, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it is the case that, you know, farmers are asset-rich and income-poor. Right, so often the farm can be worth a couple million quid at least. Then you've got all this kit that's very, very expensive, but their incomes aren't particularly high. I'm interested in the sort of food supply point, because I can see how this would cause farmers to sell up to larger agricultural firms, but they'd also be farming the land, wouldn't they? I mean, for social justice reasons, I prefer the small farmers to stay there. I think if this tax does force family farms to sell up to sort of bigger agribusinesses, that would be a bad government policy.
OK. Right, Ben, coming to you on this one again as well. According to 2023 figures from DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, the UK's self-sufficiency in fresh vegetables is at lowest since records began. I mean, so farmers actually have got a very good bargaining point here, actually, haven't they? We need the food they produce.
They have, and, I mean, that point attests to the interconnected global trading world that we now have, and many critical goods, including food, obviously, which is critical to the welfare of the British people, is now offshored. You know, we've seen it with steel, and we couldn't fight a war if we had to, because we don't have our own steel smelting plants producing the kind of steel that you need for creating tanks and warships and so on. And, of course, if we ever end up in war, having a domestic farming industry that's vibrant and capable of feeding the British people will be critical. We can't rely on international trade to deliver it. And it goes back slightly, I don't want to digress, but it goes back slightly to this whole global order. And we need to come back to the United Kingdom and think what it is that we need for the UK. And I agree with Michael to some extent that if these smaller farmers went out of business, you'd get larger farms. But actually, there's a massive war on the farming industry. There has been for 40 years. Whether it's been mounted with intent or by accident, the fact is they've been under attack for 40 years.
Why do you think the government picked on this particular tax? It doesn't make any financial sense. It's expected to raise, depending on what figures you believe, around about £520 million. Meanwhile, we are giving £536 million to foreign farmers.
Yeah, and just a couple of things then. The first thing is, from an ideological perspective, inheritance tax is an attack on property rights. These are properties, including your house, your savings, your private business, which is being caught in the same tax net as farms. These are properties that you built up through your life, having paid your taxes and being effectively suckered into believing that they're yours in perpetuity, which is the foundation of Western capitalism. Inheritance tax is an attack on Western capitalism because it removes from you that which you rightfully already own. And so any expansion...
And we've already paid tax on most of the time.
And any expansion of the IHT net is an anti-Western capitalist move. And so we must resist it because it undermines our Western capitalist approach to working.
Just bring Michael in on that one quickly. Inheritance tax in general.
In general, I'm very much in favour of inheritance tax.
Right.
And the reason I say that is because we are moving into an economy where I think inheritance actually matters just as much, if not more, than your income. So you've got lots of people of my age who are sort of working in sort of reasonably professional jobs who don't have enough money to buy a house. And the big divide is whether or not your parents own a house in London. If your parents own a house in London, you're going to be all right. If your parents don't own a house in London, you're really going to struggle. And I do think the state stepping in and saying, OK, we're going to redistribute some of this, because it is luck, frankly. I haven't earned the fact that my parents own a house in East London, right? But that is really going to benefit me. And I would be happy to...
But it is your family's property. And the state is stepping in and saying, we know you've saved money to buy this property. We know you've paid the taxes on the money you used to buy this property. But you know, we're going to have another bite at the cherry.
But you still get to keep a lot of it, right? So if I keep half the value of that house, that's still a good deal for me compared to my friends who don't have a parent who owns a house in London, right? So I think half of it being shared, half of it I get, that seems very fair.
No, I so disagree, Michael. The greatest damage done to this country by any single tax has been inheritance tax. After World War I, which is, I think, when it was introduced in order to pay for the war debt, masses of estates in this country, great buildings, heritage of this country were knocked down to avoid paying the tax. Great estates were given up. And what we've done is damage the fabric of the United Kingdom through inheritance tax. What you're playing to, and I understand the point you're making, which is, you know, a fairer shake of the dice for those who weren't fortunate enough to be born into wealth. They get that. They should be getting that fairer shake of the dice through equal opportunities, good access to education, the ability to improve their own lot, not by the state stepping in, taking away that which we've rightfully earned, and then deciding who gets what.
But that's an argument against any kind of tax, no? Surely you'd be against income tax as well, and then how do you have any redistribution?
Actually, while we're on the subject of tax, I just want to bring this one up quickly. We've just had Rachel Reeves out in our... where was she?
Davos.
Davos, thank you very much. Out in Davos. Sounding like she was backtracking on the non-dom U-turn. Now, this has been a big platform for Labour fighting the election in the first place, wasn't it? Well, you know, non-doms, we're going to tackle non-doms. And now she sounds like she's backtracking on that. At the same time, they're not even, well, they don't appear to be willing to talk to small family-run farmers.
Well, I suppose there's two issues, isn't there? So with the family farmers, I think they didn't want that to be a political issue. They just wanted to make a bit of extra money. The non-doms, I think they went for that not because it is a big money earner, but because it's a good sort of group to hit before a general election. So they went for the non-doms before the general election. I think it is unfair that they live here and they don't pay tax. But it's not.
So why is she going back on it now?
Well, because it's not actually a very good money earner, because these are very mobile people, and if you do try and charge them tax here, they might move over, abroad. Now, I think just go with it anyway, out of principle. But I think she sort of said, well, if it's not going to raise that much money, we're already struggling with growth, I really want to suck up to big business. But now, again, I don't think she should do that, but I think that's...
But the amount they're going to raise from the farmers is enough to fund the NHS for one day.
Well, that's... I think they'll now...
That's a really good point.
They're now going to regret, I think, this farmer inheritance tax. They thought they could sort of make a bit of money without really anyone noticing. People have noticed, and now it's not worth the money on political terms.
So why don't they go back on it?
Why don't they go back on it? I don't know. I suppose a government feels like if they...
I know you're not kissed. You're not speaking for the Labour Party, but...
If they make too many U-turns, that makes them look politically weak, so they have to just sort of hold this one out.
And they will hold it out.
Ride this one out.
They will ride it out, like they did with fuel allowance. But the non-dom thing, I mean, they were wrong to be nailing non-doms. The non-dom law goes back to the 19th century. It's been part, again, of our taxation framework for a very long time. And what we've seen in the last year was 10,500 millionaires leave the United Kingdom. 10,500. That is not good for the country.
Yeah. Oh, so, but people are saying to me, oh, no, that's just a myth. It's not happening. I actually, personally, because I hang around with millionaires, obviously, I actually know two people that have done that.
It is absolutely happening. The wealth, capital, cash is fluid. And if you've got Trump, for example, doing what he's doing in the States, cutting taxes, deregulating, making it easy for business, making it easier for rich people to exist in the United States, people will up sticks from the UK and they will go there.
I think this is where I really disagree with Ben, though, because I do think that one of the crises in confidence we have in our politics is because people think there is this global international elite that you seem to sort of have some problems with, who can basically say to all governments of the world, look, I know you might want to tax us to fund public services for your people, but if you try and do that, we'll move abroad. But basically what this form of globalisation has allowed is for very rich individuals to be able to basically tell states, you can't tax us or we'll leave. And what that's done is it's moved power away from democratically elected governments to a very mobile international financial elite. So I would be very much in favour of sort of international regulations that ends that race to the bottom. Now, one of Donald Trump's first moves was to withdraw from the minimum tax framework. So I think he is going to be giving more power to these international elites to say, well, if you want to tax us, we'll just leave. And I actually would like to put more power in our democratic governments, which means taking some power away from that very internationally mobile
But the minimum
elite.
taxation rate that the treaty or the agreement that he's withdrawing from is one that affects corporates, not individuals. And
but that's an example of it, right? So
Yeah.
corporations do exactly the same thing. They say, oh, well, if
But
you
we
tax
want
us, we'll
corporates
put...
here. We want corporates here.
What we want to stop is a race to the bottom.
But it's not a race to the bottom.
Well, there is a race to the bottom. That's why Apple's in Ireland, because they have 15%.
Are you saying
corporation tax.
the Irish economy or the Irish are somehow at the bottom?
In terms of taxation rates,
No,
yes.
but let me just say, this is a really good example.
They've stolen businesses from everyone else. by
Ireland
saying-
is a really good example. They are an economy that's a tenth the size of the United Kingdom. They collect a third of our corporation tax take. So they are punching way above their weight because they've got a low corporation tax rate. It's the making of the Irish economy.
But what they do, but those companies aren't producing it there. So what?
what?
Apple do is they say, well, so what? Because they're basically scamming the rest of us, right?
No, they're not scamming. What we need to do in this country is look at Ireland, cut our taxes to 12.5%.
That's why it's a race to the bottom. That is a race to the bottom.
It's a race for prosperity.
No,
it's not to the bottom.
If I had a whistle, I'd be blowing it now, but I don't, unfortunately. Unfortunately, we have run out of time on that one. I just want to go to this break, though, with a lovely picture of Naama Levy, one of the hostages, 20-year-old hostage, who's been reunited with her mum. This is a picture her mum has just released. Let's have a look at that. That just says so much, doesn't it? So there's loads more coming up. On today's show, we're returning to that story that's dominated the headlines for the past week, the guilty plea and subsequent sentencing of Axel Ruda-Kavana over the Southport killings. We're joined in the studio by a psychologist to discuss what evil actually is. All of that and much more to come. This is GB News, Britain's news channel. We'll see you very soon.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
It's a good point. He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Jonathan, in London, we're hearing that there could be more posties from an Amazon point of view in order to limit or cut carbon emissions, but that they could put more people on foot delivering their parcels.
This is really interesting because more and more people now obviously are using Amazon and buying their shopping online or buying gifts online. And it's interesting that in London they're talking about putting their Amazon workers on foot. There are now parts of the country, I think Milton Keynes is one part of the country, where there's robots delivering parcels, or you'll see these, well, they call them robots. You'll see these little things sort of bundling down the street.
Yes.
Sort of
robots.
Yeah, I mean, technically they're a robot, but when I think of a robot, I think of a sort of
a humanoid robot.
Yeah, sort of humanoid thing, sort of lost in space style robot. But actually, they're sort of little sort of carriages, little
droids,
boxes.
like Star Wars droid type.
Well, they're not
thing.
even that. They're like a little sort of like a box on wheels, delivering parcels in places like Milton Keynes and other bits of the country. So I think this is just another example of how the world is changing. Online shopping is completely changing the way in which we all live our lives, the way things.
But I think Milton Keynes lends itself to something like that. This is a newly designed town.
Yeah, exactly. That's why they're in Milton Keynes.
And I really do think that a town like that really does lend itself towards a piece of tech like that. When I think back, our postie in Gloucestershire is a guy called Dave. He's fantastic. Everyone knows who he is. But I'm not sure that he could be replaced by one of these little droid things.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the weekend with me, Dawn Neeson. Thank you for your company. Now, let's return to the story that's dominated the headlines for the past week, the guilty plea and subsequent sentencing. And you're quite right, those of you pointing it out, said I wouldn't mention his name again. I'm not. Let's just call him the Southport scumbag, shall we? He was sentenced to 52 years for murdering those 3 beautiful little girls you can see on your screen there. They're the faces I want to remember, not his. Elsie Dot-Stankham, B.B. King and Alistair Silva Aguera. Shocking revelations emerged about writing links, deleted internet history and various failings by so many people before this awful attack. So it got me thinking, what is evil? Is this evil? What have we witnessed? Is it evil? I'm joined now by psychotherapist Lucy Beresford. Lucy, thank you very much for joining me. This chap, was assessed by doctors and found to be sane, fit to stand trial. So if he's sane, he's not mad. So is he just intrinsically bad? Is he evil?
On a spectrum, one would say that he is bad, but I'm very nervous about using the word evil because I think that's the word that we use to try and put people in a box. We're very imitative creatures and we learn about the world by copying other people and trying to identify with them. We want to be like our parents or our siblings or maybe our peer group. And therefore, if this man is evil, what does that say about us? Are we a little bit like that person? So the word helpfully enables us to say, no, we're nothing like that person. We don't have murderous impulses. We don't have the ability to do hurtful or harmful things. And then they become this sort of special entity. I think it's much better that we acknowledge that, in a way, this person was incredibly damaged and incredibly frightened and incredibly angry. So angry that he had these murderous impulses from the age of 13, which were not picked up. So there are all sorts of ways in which this man was failed, the family were failed, and ultimately the 3 girls who were murdered were failed. But this man, in my opinion, is not evil. I just think he's incredibly bad.
OK, so lots of people are damaged, lots of people are scared, lots of people have horrific things happen to them, but very, very few people, thankfully, do this.
Yeah, so there is this huge debate. The jury is still out, really, in terms of things like nurture and nature. His parents fled the genocide in Rwanda, so arguably they too had been very traumatised by their experiences. They did not go ahead and seek to murder other people, whereas this young man did. And therefore you have to ask yourself, what is it about an individual? Is it about the parenting they have or the environment they're in or the trauma that they might have experienced as a child? Or is it a whole constellation of that? So what we know already, because information has now come out in the last 24 hours, is that he was very badly bullied, for example. Now, this, again, is not mitigating circumstances, it's not trying to excuse it, but it does explain why this person began to feel, I've got nowhere else to go, rather than to retreat into my fantasies and to really lean into the rage that I feel, that absolutely intoxicating rage that this young man had.
And is there a way you can tell, you know, as I said just now, lots of people have awful things happen to them in life. You go through amazing, you know, the most horrendous trauma. Do not commit crimes like this. Is there a way of telling which person has that trigger in their brain that lets them behave like this?
Well, not necessarily, but the very unfortunate thing is that the information we're now getting in the last 24 hours shows that there was a pattern. This is not a young man who was found once on a bus with a knife. This is a man who was found twice with a knife, who had teachers who reported him to prevent, and nothing was done. He wasn't seen. Times, yeah. He wasn't, well, 2 by the teachers and 1 by a different social services.
Things got worse during lockdown, where no kids were going to school and there was no additional oversight. So at every stage, you can sort of point to these things that happened. Why was nothing done at that particular moment? But the whole, I suppose, trajectory of events eventually meant that this person was not stopped, wasn't helped and wasn't stopped. Now, many people think, I don't want to help someone like that. I don't want to really... But when you see where they could end up, murdering 3 young girls at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class, then you think, well, actually, I do want to understand where someone like this comes from so that we can intervene.
Gentlemen, I'm going to bring you into on this one because it is a fascinating, conversation. I mean, you know, mad or bad. I mean, that's the basics here. I mean, he wasn't mad according to doctors, so therefore, as Lucy's just said, he was bad. I mean, Michael, is there such a thing as evil, and is this what we've witnessed this week?
I mean, I suppose I don't tend to think in terms of good and evil. I'm not sure how sort of helpful it is. I mean, obviously, what this person has done is awful. Obviously, I want to see him in prison for a very, very long time. I suppose the question is, how could he have been stopped? That's sort of the most interesting question to me. And I suppose I'd be interested. It does seem remarkable, some of the events that happened, and he wasn't stopped. So the one that stands out most to me is when the police caught him, I think, on a bus with a knife, and he said he was going to stab someone so he would get arrested and the police would help delete some videos from social media. Now, the idea that you'd say that to the police and then be sent home and not much else happen seems remarkable to me. Precisely what should have happened at that point, I'm less clear, because I suppose you can't put someone in prison permanently because they've said something. Do you put them in a mental institution, but then he wasn't mentally unwell? I think it's really difficult to know what should have happened, but clearly something
should have happened. It's very interesting you mentioned social media there, because we don't know the full internet search history, because there are trouble accessing.
And they might take years to actually get that material.
Yes, which is a very interesting story in its own right. But we do know that it was access. He was obsessed with genocide and cruelty. How important does social media and the internet play in this?
Well, it plays quite a big role, and one looks at what they're looking to do in Australia in terms of banning social media for people under 16, and you can imagine why they might do that and think that that's a good thing. The problem with social media is that it's not so much about what you might see and look at when you're out in the wide world. It's when you get cloistered away in your bedroom and you never come out. Many people in his environment, in his community, said they never saw him. He became a bit of a recluse. And therefore what he's doing is he's operating in an echo chamber. And the more, again, we're imitative creatures, as I said at the outset. You see this material, you see more material, you get the dopamine hit, you need to see more extreme versions of it to get the same kind of dopamine hit. It's like any other addiction, really. But this person was addicted to looking at violent images. And therefore, the ease with which he could access that because it was on social media is really, really an important question for the platforms themselves to speak about.
And Ben, going on the social media and the internet thing here, I mean, you know, the problem started when he was a young teenager. We have to bring in some element of parental responsibility here. Parents should not let their kids just access whatever they want on the internet. Surely we have to take into account the parents' behaviour.
Well, I think that's absolutely crucial. And what we've seen, certainly in my lifetime, is an abrogation of an increasing abrogation of parental responsibility, and the state having ever more influence in the way our children are brought up, and frankly, in my view, to some extent, indoctrinated now with state philosophy, as opposed to having the kind of education that they would have had when I'm digressing, but you see the point I'm making.
Yeah.
And, you know, an individual like Rudakabana a couple of hundred years ago would have been dealt with, I think, by his parents, by his community. They would have identified him as a threat to the community, and he would have been taken into account. But of course, we've given up all authority and control, not all, but a very substantial amount of authority and control to the state. And so we expect the state now to be looking in and sorting these things out. And that is a problem. The only other point I'd like to make, Lucy, is, of course, your analysis is spot on from an individual's perspective, but in the collective, he is incompatible with community, isn't he? An individual like Rudakabana, whatever the causes are, however which way he may have been capable of being intercepted, his existence, his view of life, his approach, everything is incompatible with the settled community. And so from a community perspective, he needs to be removed, doesn't he?
Apart from the fact that, as you said, 200 years ago, he wouldn't have been removed. He would have been marinated within the community. Well, I think that, yes, I mean, I think the key thing is the parents themselves were also struggling. He was given over to Alderhay, the Children's Hospital, with their mental health services, but he just never showed up. There is a photo of his bedroom. It looks incredibly chaotic, and I don't want to trivialise this, but many parents just need to know what's going on in the bedrooms of their children. Why are their children's bedrooms so untidy, and what are they hiding? If you don't really know what's going on with your child, that is down to you.
Lucy Beresford, thank you very much. That's Lucy Beresford, psychotherapist, on the horrors of Southport. Thank you very much. I'm Dawn Neeson from GBNews. There's lots more coming up on today's show. I'll be showing you a shocking viral video showing a baby being forced to wear a hijab. But first, let's get those news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Dawn, thank you. The top stories: 4 female Israeli soldiers held by terror group Hamas have been released and have been reunited with their families. They were taken to hospital in Tel Aviv upon their release, where they finally met with their families after 15 months in captivity. Hostages Karina Ariev, Daniela Gilboa, Namav Levy, all aged 20, and 19-year-old Liri Albag were all serving with the Israel Defense Forces when they were captured. Surrounded by armed Hamas fighters, the women waved and smiled as they were led onto a podium in Gaza City upon their release, before being guided to Red Cross vehicles, taken to a border point and then handed to the IDF. Israel has now released 200 Palestinian prisoners. It's the second exchange since the ceasefire began last weekend. The first wave saw 3 Israeli hostages released, including British-Israeli Emily Damari. The Met Office says Storm Eowyn was probably the strongest storm to hit the UK in at least 10 years. And now up to 80 millimetres of rainfall could be seen in parts of England and Wales, with several amber and yellow warnings issued by the Met Office for today and tomorrow. It comes after those winds reached 100 miles per hour yesterday as the storm left a person dead. He's been named today as Casper Dudek. Network Rail gave an update today saying most of its network is now back up and running. And farmers from across the UK are staging a national day of unity in a bid to protect the sector. It comes as pressures mounting on the government to halt the controversial family farm tax that could see some forced to sell their land to foot the bill. The National Farmers Union warned that many farmers were at breaking point and couldn't afford increased bills. And those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, Aaron Armstrong has your next update.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. Storm Eowyn brought plenty of disruption to end the working week, and there's still some changeable weather on the way as we head through the rest of the weekend. Storm Eowyn, though, moving away towards the northeast, towards Scandinavia, and then we see this weather front arriving through the rest of Saturday and into the start of Sunday, bringing some outbreaks of showery rain. But before we get there, there will be plenty of sunshine on offer through Saturday afternoon for many of us. Still some isolated showers across much of Scotland, these likely falling as sleet and snow over the hills, and still rather windy across the Northern Isles, gusts here of 50 to 60 miles an hour to end the day on Saturday. Temperatures will be round about average for most of us, although definitely feeling chilly where you're exposed to that breeze further north. As we then go through Saturday evening, we see that band of showery rain arriving across western parts of the UK. So across Northern Ireland first and into parts of western Scotland, again turning to sleet and snow over any high ground. But eastern Scotland generally staying a little drier through this evening with some clear skies to start. For Northern Ireland, we do see those blustery showers though, and again we could see some sleet and snow over the hills. And it'll be turning rather windy on this weather front as it pushes its way eastwards. For much of England, a dry start to the night, but further west we see that showery rain arriving. Some quite heavy downpours likely on this as it spreads its way eastwards into the early hours of Sunday morning. It starts to fizzle out by the time it gets to eastern parts of England, but we could see some sleet and snow over the high ground across the parts of the Pennines, but then generally turning drier behind, and we could see some clear skies developing, allowing temperatures to drop quite widely, particularly across Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland. Some frost likely and perhaps some ice in places, but generally a little bit of a milder start further south. We see some clouds starting to build, and all eyes down towards the southwest as we see this next weather front pushing up from the southwest, spreading its way north and eastwards, bringing some quite heavy rainfall to parts of southwest England, parts of Wales, even into parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England too, and some strong winds likely as we go through Sunday afternoon. Temperatures again around about average for the time of year, but some milder air just being brought up across the southwest.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Hello and welcome back to The Weekend with me, Dawn Neeson. Now, Nana Akua has joined us in the studio. She's got a cracking show lined up. She always does at 3 o'clock. Nana, what you got today for us?
Well, good to see you, Dawn, as well. But you know what? It's going to be a busy show because we're going to ask you whether you think it's time to bring back the death penalty. You know, my views on it. For people like Rida Kabana, in my views, that is pretty much the only thing that I think he should have had, really. But what do you think? I'll have Matthew Stadlen in to tell me why I'm wrong in my little statement.
Good luck with that one, Matthew.
Stay tuned for that. Also, I'm going to be asking you, because Ben Afwedu is coming into the studio as well. He is Vanessa Phelps' ex, but he has a new girlfriend, and she is also called Vanessa. So Vanessa 2.0. Plus, do you think that Trump is doing a good job in his first week or so? He's already got a load of illegal criminal migrants to leave the country, some of them on their own accord. So that's all coming up.
That sounds a real cracker. That's Nana coming up at 3 o'clock with a man trying to tell her she's wrong. Good luck with that one. Thanks, Nana. We'll see you later. Now, this video has gone viral online. Brace yourself, people. It shows a baby being forced to wear a hijab. And let's have a look at that. There you can see that's Dad with his little daughter, little girl. People are so astounded they're actually taking pictures of it. Now, we don't know where this footage is actually taken, but Dad's walking down the road with a backpack on with his little daughter in it, wearing a black hijab. She's wearing a pink romper suit. Mum and wife walking down the road next to him with two other little girls, both wearing full black burqas, basically. I saw this online. I had to keep watching because I couldn't quite believe what I was watching. Joining us now to discuss this is broadcaster and neurodiversity coach Fahima Mahmood. Fahima, thank you very much for joining us today. Fahima, this is indeed going viral online, understandably so. What did you make when you saw it?
Well, firstly, my faith, Islam, does not make it mandatory or an obligation for any child, especially a baby, to wear a hijab, to wear anything of that sort. And the thing is, you know, we do see quite a lot of media that does actually connotate wearing the hijab to something very negative and oppressive, as well as extremism, where we have to also understand that, you know, Islam is so wide and varied that it is not just, you know, one sort of like culture that actually has that kind of way of thinking and bringing. So when children are being brought up in that way, it is parents that are bringing on the culture to their children. It's not necessarily the actual faith itself. And we need to understand that. And Islam encompasses people from across the globe, whether you're in Africa, whether you're, in Europe, even now in the UK, we've got like thousands of people converting to Islam every single year. So it's not the faith that needs to be sort of questioned. It's more about people's understanding, and there's several interpretations within Islam. Now, in the UK, there's majority of, for example, Pakistani people that make up the Muslim community, which does not represent me. I'm not from that country. We have Arabs that are different to Pakistanis. We have Africans. We have, so many different types, even Indonesia being the most amount of Muslims across the globe. And people need to understand that it is a choice. Yes, it is a command by my faith, but the hijab is not just also an actual garment. It actually is a representation of an actual behavior, the treatment, and more to do with that, not just outwardly, but inwardly. And it is a choice when you come of age, because it should not be forced, even if it is a command. So if any country, any person is forcing it, is being coercive, is actually putting that, whether it's a child or not, it does not represent the faith itself. Let's just get that one thing straight.
So Fahima, what would make a man? He's also got two other little girls, and they don't look like they've hit puberty. They do look like they're sort of like, between the ages of 5 and 10, fully covered up. What would make a man do that? Why do you think he's doing that?
Well, it's not just Muslims. If you look at, Christianity, Judaism, a lot of people will carry their faith and cultures into their children for maybe an occasion, and they will dress up in a particular way, or even children might mimic. Yes, a baby of that has no choice, and it is up to the parents. That's why parents make decisions for their children over many things, which we don't like. The fact that they don't make them eat healthy and they might be obese. Many things, right? But at the same time, it is not to be looked at as if it is only under the umbrella of Islam, and the fact that we are wearing it because we are forced and it's oppressive. My family particularly do not wear, and most of the females do not wear the hijab. Even my own mum doesn't. It was my choice. And yes, it might be, other places. I'm not going to deny that there are people that are forced to wear it. And I'm one of those few Muslim voices that will call it out, even in my own community. I'm not liked for the things that are out there. But there's always rotten apples in every kind of crate, whether you come from Islam or any other faith. I don't know. I think there are occasions that people will dress up. They might represent, maybe it was, whether even some kids, they go to the mosque. They don't need to wear it, but they want to imitate. It's not a force. It's not something that you can see that's unhealthy.
OK, Fahima, thank you very much. We have run out of time, unfortunately. Fahima Mahmood, thank you very much for joining us. Well, I wonder what my panel make of this one. Michael Walker and Ben Habib are still with me. Ben, what do you make of this one?
Well, I had an extensive debate with my daughter last night, who is left-leaning and liberal, about the niqab, the fully clad thing. And her argument was, I'm digressing, but I think it's on point. Her argument was, Daddy, you're not in a position to opine. How old is your daughter? Do you mind me asking? She is 23.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And she's at Bristol, just graduated, did a master's in zoology from Bristol. And her argument was, Daddy, it's not for you to decide whether or not women should wear a niqab. That is their perfect right to decide to wear a niqab if that's what they wish. And this girl, presumably to baby, not that she can express her wish, to wear a hijab. But my point is that we've spent hundreds of years for the emancipation of women, and this is the outer representation of the inner repression of women. And there's no other way to look at it. And it is wholly incompatible with Western culture and the way we think in the United Kingdom. So I don't think the niqab can be justified in any shape or form. The hijab I have a lesser problem with, but it's not part of British culture.
Michael, just very quickly.
I have quite a simple view on this. People can dress how they like.
A baby can't make that choice.
A baby, the baby is a sort of exceptional case. I'm fairly worried about the baby who's been put in a hijab. But apart from babies, people should be able to dress how they want. And people should be able to have opinions about dress as well. If you don't like the niqab, that's completely
Unfortunately, we're having a slight issue with your mic there. Right, OK, sorry about that. We have to move on as well. And if you are in search of some winter sun to cheer yourself up, here is the forecast for some of those top European holiday destinations.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
More showers to come across Cyprus this weekend, although it does look dry out by Monday. There's more wet weather to come across parts of Spain and Portugal too. There are those showers clearing by Monday. Plenty of fine and sunny weather over the central Mediterranean. Good-looking day on Sunday across Sicily and Sardinia. Some sunshine for the Balearics, but more rain heading into southern Spain and Portugal. Plenty of sunshine in the Canaries this weekend, and things are warming up into the mid-20s on Monday in Tenerife.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Have you noticed that more and more stores are closing? Well, last year, apparently 13,000 stores closed for the last time on the high street.
Well, experts warn the worst is still to come for our small businesses.
Well, let's talk to retail expert Jeremy Baker. Good morning to you, Jeremy. How bad is it and what can be done?
Well, nothing can be done about it. Retail is like that. It's a boom and bust operation. So last year, let's say you had a shop and it was booming. This year, the consumer can just change their mind. They don't need to come back to your shop ever again.
Well, it is sad, Jeremy, because our high streets are the beating heart of our communities, aren't they? And for many people, I know I can relate to my high street, it is such a depressing sight, walking down there and seeing them all boarded up and closed down.
But how often do you walk down the boarded up high street? I think people move on to something else. The online world is very big. Yeah. And lots of other things are very exciting. And so people, you know, the shop, I like to go to my GP in a shopping centre and get my tests done there rather than tramp off all the way to the GP, for example. And children could go to little schools in the high street. I've seen that happen already. So lots of things could happen to the high street. It could be much more a social centre. Much more kind of like pubs, coffee shops, all that. Charities. I don't see anything wrong with charities taking over. But the idea of the shop-centred high street finished, that's gone. Never coming back. Goodbye. It's not sad, it's just life.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Welcome back to the weekend with me, Dawn Needham. We've saved the best till last because the wonderful Steph Tetchy is here with something about faithful and traitors and no idea.
Traitors.
Yeah, go on.
Everyone's talking about. I know everyone loves talking about GB, but people are also talking about the traitors. It is one of the most nail-biting series that has been on the BBC. 12 episodes, and it's about who can you really trust, a traitor or a faithful. It had 22 contestants, all battling out for this £96,000 final prize, and you have to guess who's a traitor and who was a faithful. So we saw it come to an end yesterday, hosted by Claudia Winkleman. It's shared by two people who won the prize, £96,000, Leanne and Jake. But the thing is, Dawn, with this show, you have to guess is the person I'm actually dealing with someone who's faithful, someone I can trust, or is it someone who's a traitor? And if they are a traitor, their aim is to get as much of the faithfuls out as possible. It's addictive viewing, Dawn. It is like psychological warfare. There was one character, one lady on there called Charlotte throughout the whole series who was pretending to speak in a Welsh accent, but she's actually from London. So this is the kind of stuff we're talking about here. So it's very gripping. It was the finale yesterday, and luckily the right two people did win.
Right, OK.
Yeah.
Were they the good guys that
They were
won
the
them?
good guys. They had their good instincts and they realised that both of them were faithful, but they did let go of two other people who were faithfuls, who lost out on the jackpot prize.
Right.
Trust me, Dawn, it sounds confusing, but if you watch it, you would get into
So it is like a reality TV show.
It is a reality TV show, but I find most people can relate because it's all about instincts. Like, when you're talking to someone, can I actually trust that they're one of the good guys or one of the bad guys? And trusting your own instincts. So I think that's why so many people got addicted to it. It's
because it's
shot
like
really
life,
well.
really.
It is, and I think it is art imitating life.
Right, OK. And then the other thing is we
We're
need to talk
talking about Oscars nominations.
Darling.
It came out on Thursday. Leading the way is Emilia Perez. It's a Spanish musical about a drug cartel who decides to change from a he to a she.
Right.
So we've got our first transgender actress who's up for an award for that, Carla Gascon Sofia. I think she'll do really well, but Wicked has done really well. 10 nominations in the bag, yeah. But the thing is, Dawn, I think they have racked up really good nomination, including Cynthia Erivo, who's up for Best Actress. But I think on the night, you tend to see it will go to the film The Brutalist. I don't know if you've watched it.
That sounds like 3 hours.
You got it right.
Yeah.
3 hours. It's like an Oppenheimer, and I can imagine it's going to do well, but probably not a box office hit with audiences.
Steph, thank you so much for bringing me up to date on that. I've been Dawn Neeson. This has been GBNews The Weekend. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you to the brilliant panel, Michael Walker and Ben Habib. Most importantly, thank you for your company this afternoon. Really enjoyed your company. OK, but don't go anywhere, though, because there's plenty more coming up on GB News. It's Nana Aquia at 6 o'clock, and then after that, until 6, and after that, the Saturday 5. I'm back with lunch tomorrow. Here's the weather with Ellie.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. It's going to stay quite changeable as we head over the rest of the weekend and into the start of the new working week. Low pressure always close by to the UK, bringing some wet and windy weather at times. Stormy Owen, that brought disruption through Friday, clears away towards Scandinavia. Then we've got this weather front arriving through Saturday evening and into the start of Sunday, bringing some outbreaks of quite heavy and showery rain across parts of Northern Ireland, and then later into parts of Scotland, Northern England, parts of Wales too. It generally fizzles out by the time it gets towards eastern England, and we will see some clear skies developing behind. And under those clear skies, likely to turn quite chilly, particularly across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland, seeing some frost and perhaps some icy stretches through Sunday morning. A touch milder across the very far south, although temperatures still dropping down into the low single figures. But a bit of cloud then building across the southwest. We see this weather front arriving, pushing its way north and eastwards, bringing some quite heavy downpours across parts of Devon and Cornwall through the early hours of Sunday morning. A bit of a dry start for the rest of England, and for Northern Ireland and Scotland, generally quite a dry, bright and chilly start to the day on Sunday. Some showers still continuing across the very far north of Scotland. Again, these likely falling as sleet and snow over any high ground. That weather front across the very far southwest pushes its way north and eastwards through Sunday morning and into the afternoon. That heavy rain then spreading across parts of Northern Ireland, parts of Northern England and later into parts of Scotland too. Turning really quite blustery as well behind that weather front, some heavy and blustery showers pushing in from the southwest. Temperatures will be round about average for the time of year for most of us, although generally staying a little bit milder across the south as we see some milder air brought in. Across Scotland, it will be a dry and bright afternoon, but that rain eventually reaches them through Sunday evening, likely to turn to sleet and snow over the high ground. And then we've got another weather front just pushing across the south of the UK. Again, some heavy downpours likely here. Generally remaining unsettled through the first part of next week, but there are some hints that we're likely to see high pressure starting to build, although perhaps turning a little chilly.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win our biggest cash prize so far, £50,000 in tax-free cash. How would you react if you won?
We won 25,000. I'd say don't hesitate, do it. If you're not in it, you've got no chance of winning it.
Don't miss out as lines close on Friday. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun. No, he didn't say that, though. I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camila, Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camila Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akweer. It's 3 o'clock for the next few hours. Me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me for the next few hours, broadcaster and journalist Claire Muldoon, and also political commentator Jonathan Liss. Coming up on today's show, we'll be discussing the Southport murderer Axel Rudakabana and how he has avoided a whole lifetime